Daenerys Targaryen stood upon the battlements of Winterfell, the chill of the northern wind snapping at her silver-white hair as she gazed across the courtyard below. The sun was newly risen, its pale light barely illuminating the barren lands and tall towers of Stark rule. There was a hush over the castle, a stillness that felt neither peaceful nor reassuring. It was just the calm of an exhausted people. The Great War had been won, yet so much had been lost in the process. Snow coated every surface, a hush of white that concealed the scars and bloodstains of countless battles and burned pyres. Despite the hush, she could sense the undercurrent of tension drifting in the breeze. It was a feeling she had tasted many times before, a certain knowledge that the end of one war did not necessarily mean the end of conflict, not in Westeros and certainly not within her own soul. She looked down at the main gatehouse where black-cloaked soldiers patrolled. Her loyal, unsullied mingled with northerners, but there was little conversation between them. A handful of Dothraki were huddled around a brazier swaddled in furs. Normally, they would have bristled at the cold, complaining that this land was too barren and lacked the essential warmth and color of their distant homeland. Now perhaps they were too weary to give voice to anything but relief. Winter had pressed heavily against them. The army of the dead had left them battered. Yet the silver-haired queen, Daenerys Stormborn of the House Targaryen, had lived. She had lost many, from beloved companions to trusted advisors, but here she stood, still determined, still resolute, for there was a realm that needed ruling. That was the Targaryen way: hold fast, conquer, survive. Quiet footfalls along the rampart drew her attention. She glanced to her side, noticing Tyrion Lannister, her hand, who approached with careful steps that crunched in the fresh snow. His brow was furrowed beneath his dark hair that had grown long during the war, and the scars of sleepless nights lay like bruises under his eyes. He came to a halt a short distance away, gazed out at the same courtyard, and finally spoke in a low voice that carried even on the mild wind. "They're waiting for you in the Great Hall. Shall we?" Daenerys turned her face away from the quiet expanse, nodding once. She could sense Tyrion's tension, perhaps the same tension that coiled inside her own ribcage, pressing against her heart. The meeting she was about to attend was no trivial affair. It would determine not only her rule but the shape of the entire realm. The north was seething. The common folk murmured in the corridors and the godwood, unsure whether to trust the queen who had promised her help and delivered it, but at such cost. The dragons had descended on Winterfell like vengeful gods, scorching the sky. Though they had fought side by side to defeat the army of the dead, old mistrusts, old resentments remained. And Sansa Stark had made no secret of her skepticism. They descended together, passing through narrow corridors illuminated by smoky torches. The walls felt as though they pressed in on Daenerys, so different from the wide free spaces of the Dothraki Sea, or the warmth of the Great Pyramid in Meereen, or even the Red Keep that she had visited briefly in King's Landing. Winterfell was older than all of them, older than the Targaryen conquest, older than the 100 kingdoms that had once dotted Westeros. Its ancient stones bore silent witness to 1,000 tragedies and triumphs, and Daenerys did not doubt that if these halls could speak, they would speak warily about a Targaryen queen walking among them. At last, they arrived at the large doors leading into the Great Hall. 2 northern guards, sworn to the service of House Stark, pushed them open and stood aside for the queen and her companion. Entering the hall, Daenerys saw the high table where she would sit, with seats prepared for herself and Tyrion, and to her right, an empty seat for the Lady of Winterfell. The hall was filled with more men and women than usual for such a meeting, all fixated on the queen's next move. The faint smell of smoke wafted in the air from the hearth that struggled to keep the cold at bay. She made her way to the front, flanked by Grey Worm, who stood guard silently in an unsullied uniform reinforced with northern furs. She heard only the echo of her footsteps and the rustle of cloaks. Once there, she took her seat, Tyrion at her left. As she waited, the hush made the atmosphere thick. She noticed a few northern lords. Lady Lyanna Mormont had perished in the battle, and her seat was now taken by her cousin. There was Lord Glover, his expression as stony as ever, along with a smattering of others. Their faces showed caution, not necessarily open hostility, but certainly no adoration. Then the doors opened again, admitting Sansa Stark. Her rich auburn hair was braided back, revealing a high forehead and calm, regal features. She wore a simple yet elegant dark gown trimmed in thick wolf fur, a testament to northern practicality. A hush, if possible, sank further over the room. She approached the high table deliberately and stood before it, giving Daenerys a measured, courteous nod. Then she took her seat. No glance of apology or resentment, just determination. It was Daenerys who spoke first. Her voice was steady, pitched so those in the far corners could hear her. We have all lost much. To the Night King, to Cersei's treachery, to the wars that have plagued this land for too long. We stand at a threshold. The Iron Throne is mine by right, but a throne is only as stable as the people who stand behind it. She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the lords and ladies. It is no secret to me that many in the north do not wish to be ruled by someone from the south. Someone they barely know, someone with dragon's blood in her veins. I also know that we have spilt blood side by side. We stood against the greatest enemy that has ever threatened this world, and we prevailed. If we cannot learn to set aside old hatreds and distrust after that, when shall we ever? Her words were deliberate, and a flicker of reaction passed through the hall, some leaning forward, some glancing at each other warily. Sansa's eyes searched Daenerys's face. It was difficult to read them fully, but there was no immediate cold retort, which was a small victory in its own right. Daenerys took a measured breath. The North has carried its own burdens for centuries. You have endured savage winters and the threat of annihilation. You, Sansa Stark, have gone through more than many can even imagine. And I admire the conviction that burns within you, the same conviction that saved so many lives. I've seen how your people look to you, and I've seen how you look out for them. Perhaps I did not respect that enough before, perhaps I was too driven by my own quest to realize what truly mattered to you. She paused, her voice slightly gentler. But I want it clearly understood here and now that I have heard you. I have heard the concerns of the North, and I have given them deep thought. The entire hall seemed to be holding its breath. Some in the crowd shifted, uncertain. Tyrion and Varys had both advised Daenerys that if she was to maintain peace in the Seven Kingdoms, she must address the North with unprecedented generosity. Some of her instincts had resisted, but she was not a fool. She had learned hard lessons across the narrow sea, how to adapt, how to show mercy, how to be not just a conqueror but a true ruler. Sansa blinked, and her lips parted slightly as though to speak, but Daenerys pressed on. I have decided that the North shall be free to govern itself under your guidance. You will not be forced to bend the knee to me as your queen from the South. You will be queen in the North or Lady of Winterfell if you prefer the older titles, with full autonomy for your people. Silence swelled, and Daenerys let it resonate. All I ask is that we stand as allies, that you do not raise arms against me or any part of Westeros in conquest. Let the North remain a strong, loyal friend to the Iron Throne, but let it also remain yours, truly. That is the future I offer you. A sharp intake of breath hissed through the assembly. A sudden noise of astonishment from the lords who had expected a renewed clash, not leniency. Sansa Stark herself looked as if she had heard incorrectly for a moment. She blinked again, her gaze flicking to Tyrion, who only gave a nod, confirming what Daenerys had said. For the space of a dozen heartbeats, everyone waited for Sansa's reply. When Sansa at last spoke, her voice was quiet yet firm. You would truly grant the North its independence? Free of the rule of the Iron Throne? Daenerys inclined her head. The North would remain part of the realm in spirit. We will sign treaties of alliance and trade, but it shall be under your governance. You and your descendants, if that is your wish and if that is what the North desires. However, the Iron Throne will not command you, Lady Stark. It was as though a spark of faint light flickered behind Sansa's eyes, a careful hope that she had not permitted herself before. She pressed her lips together, glanced around at the assembled lords and ladies of the North, who stood looking to her with renewed wonder. When her gaze came back, it fixed on Daenerys. I have misjudged you, she admitted. I believed you would never truly respect the North's desire to remain apart. You have proven me wrong. For that I am grateful. The tension in the hall seemed to uncoil like a rope that had been twisted too tight. She and Daenerys regarded one another for a long moment, and in that shared silence, a fragile peace was forged. The hush in the hall was so complete that the crackle of the hearth seemed unnaturally loud. Sansa inclined her head, her hair sweeping her shoulders. You came to the North when no other allies could be found. You brought dragons, you brought armies, and you risked everything alongside us. I have not forgotten that. If it is truly your wish to give the North its freedom, I would accept on behalf of my people. But I do not wish for this alliance to be built on distrust or grudges. Let it be founded on mutual respect. Daenerys offered a small, genuine smile, one of relief mingled with solemn acknowledgement. Then let us be done with suspicion, she said. We have bigger concerns ahead. The realm has been fractured by years of war. Cersei might be gone, but other troubles still fester. We will need a firm alliance to face them together. Sansa nodded, her eyes drifting to the side as if the memory of the war for the Dawn, the cruelty they had all suffered, weighed heavy upon her. She finally lifted her gaze. Then we have an accord. The North will stand with House Targaryen. We will not kneel, but we will not war with you. We share the memory of what we fought for and lost. A hush followed, then murmurs began to ripple across the hall. It was Tyrion who cleared his throat, tapped a finger lightly on the table, and said in a lighter tone it would seem cause for a celebration. Or at least a hearty meal and some mulled wine, if not a grand feast. A faint ripple of laughter followed. The smaller lords nodded, guarded smiles on their faces. It was unthinkable that a Targaryen monarch would yield such a concession, but times had changed. The dead had walked, and everything about the old world had been tested. Sansa's posture relaxed for the first time in recent memory. She cast a warm glance at Tyrion, her former husband in a sham of a marriage, but a man she had come to trust. Then, as was her wont, she composed her expression and faced Daenerys again. "Thank you," Sansa said simply. "Let the realm see that not all power must be taken by force. Sometimes it can be granted in trust." That was how it began, an uneasy peace, a fragile new tapestry of alliances. Daenerys rose from her seat, as did Sansa, and they clasped each other's hands. Applause erupted, tentative at first, but growing stronger with each passing beat of the heart until the whole hall felt it. Some of the lords might have done so grudgingly, but in that moment they recognized the promise of peace, the promise of a new era. In the corner of her vision, Daenerys caught Grey Worm's watchful gaze. She inclined her head to him in reassurance. The Unsullied had come a long way, and perhaps at last they could find an end to marching and bloodshed. They sat again, the assembled lords and ladies breathing a collective sigh of relief, and the heavy doors to the great hall opened to allow servants bearing trays of meat pies, roasted vegetables, and pitchers of spiced wine. There was no roaring feast with music and dancing, not in these battered times, but there was food enough to remind them that they lived, that winter had not taken them all. Daenerys sipped from a cup of hot wine, not so different from the mulled concoctions in Essos but far less spicy. At least it chased the chill from her bones. Tyrion, beside her, drained his own cup in a single motion before flagging a servant for more. Sansa was to Daenerys's right, picking at her plate of roasted parsnips and salted pork. Daenerys's heart still pounded with the aftershock of what she had just done. This was more than a political gesture. She had let go of what she had always believed was hers by birthright, the entire realm, 7 kingdoms from the north to Dorne. She was forcing herself to remember that a queen who only possessed a throne through fear was no queen at all. A queen should protect her people, and if her people believed their freedom was worth more than any vow of fealty, then perhaps it was time to shape a new tradition. She recalled Missandei's gentle voice from so many months ago in distant Meereen, urging her to find new ways to lead, to let go of the old cycles of vengeance and subjugation. Missandei had believed in a different kind of queen, one who could break the wheel. Daenerys felt a pang of sadness that her dear friend was not there to see this moment. This was what Missandei would have wanted for her, to be a just and honorable ruler, not a tyrant. She inhaled, allowing a sense of calm to settle over her. The hall was filled with quiet conversation as northern lords passed their cups for refills. Daenerys noticed Gendry, recently made Lord of Storms and in the aftermath of the wars, seated near the lower tables, glancing surreptitiously at Arya Stark, who had slipped in late and now stood near a back pillar, her expression guarded. There was Brienne of Tarth, tall and imposing, exchanging quiet words with Ser Davos Seaworth. And somewhere, close to the pillars, the Hound might be lurking in the shadows, as was his way. She realized how many souls had converged in these halls, how many stories braided together to bring them to this day. Sansa turned to Daenerys, setting down her fork. She spoke softly so that only Daenerys could hear. "I want you to know I'm not ungrateful. I've seen the looks on your followers' faces when I argued for northern independence. They feared I was trying to usurp your power, but that wasn't my intention. I've seen enough in the south to know the north is different. If it bends too readily, if it forgets its roots, it loses itself. But I never wanted a new war." Daenerys studied her face. The auburn-haired Stark had endured humiliation at King's Landing, cruelty at the hands of Joffrey, then terror under Ramsay Bolton. She had lost her parents, half her siblings. She had led her own forces into a war against the dead, risking everything. Through it all, she'd learned to navigate political labyrinths with a quiet ferocity. This, Daenerys recognized, was a woman shaped by tragedy and sharpened by it. "You love the North," Daenerys observed. "I understand. I love my birthright, and I love my people. I am beginning to see that love doesn't have to come in only one shape. I was so focused on reuniting the 7 kingdoms under Targaryen rule that I never paused to ask if it was the best course for all involved. Holding power over an unwilling land that helps no one. Sansa's blue eyes flicked up. Then you must see something of your own reflection in me or I in you. Her mouth quirked into a faint semblance of a smile. Perhaps we're both too stubborn. Daenerys gave a small chuckle, surprising even herself. The cracks in the old order have already spread. If it's stubbornness, it might be precisely what's needed to reshape the realm. Sansa nodded, and for a moment they sat in a companionable quiet, letting the hall's hum of conversation wash around them. Tyrion shot a glance their way as though relieved they were not at each other's throats. Daenerys sipped more wine, trying to quell the anxious knot that still lingered beneath her ribs. This was a beginning, yes, but sustaining trust would take time. She had offered Sansa the North. Now she had to follow through and truly accept that reality. She had to prove to these people that she would not renege on her promise. The old Targaryen kings had kept the northern lords in line by forging alliances with them and sometimes through fire and blood. But the wheel was turning differently now. When the meal had passed and the hall began to empty, Daenerys and Sansa found themselves approached by a handful of lords who expressed their cautious respect. Even the taciturn Lord Glover managed a small bow. The new leader of Bear Island, a boy barely older than 16, stammered his thanks for Daenerys' help in the battles. Each step reminded Daenerys of the precariousness of goodwill. She handled them with gentle courtesy, and Sansa too remained gracious, as if the heavy burden on both their shoulders had grown lighter. Afterwards, once the hall had cleared, Tyrion escorted Daenerys through the corridors to the solar where she could rest and attend to further matters. Before she could retire, the steady figure of Ser Davos stood waiting outside. He inclined his head respectfully. "Your Grace," Davos said. "And Lady Stark," he added as Sansa came to stand beside Daenerys. "I've just received a raven from King's Landing. I thought it best to share the contents immediately." Daenerys motioned for him to continue. "What news?" Davos hesitated, then cleared his throat. "A faction of the old Lannister forces remains near the Trident. They aren't large in number, but they appear to be organizing. I'm not sure if they mean open rebellion, but rumor has it a self-styled lord is stirring them, claiming a Lannister cousin's right to the throne. There's talk of gold from the Iron Bank as well, though it might only be rumors. In any case, they may be mustering trouble." Daenerys exhaled slowly. So soon after everything, new rebellions were cropping up. She should not be surprised. Across the sea, she had encountered the Sons of the Harpy resistance movements that sprang up in the wake of her conquests. Here, the same dynamic would play out. Power vacuums drew opportunists. She glanced at Sansa, who wore a concerned frown. Tyrion spoke up, his voice thoughtful. "A Lannister cousin, you say? I wonder if it's one of my father's lesser-known brothers' brood. There are a few distant relations lurking about, each with some thread of entitlement or greed. The Iron Bank might be a problem if they decide to fund an insurrection. We all know they want their debts paid, and they'll back a contender if they think it will fill their coffers." Daenerys braced a hand against the cold stone wall. "I will not allow further bloodshed if it can be prevented. But if they threaten the stability of the realm, we must act. I still have my armies, though they're weary. And my dragons." She swallowed, thinking of Drogon and Rhaegal. Viserion was gone. She hoped not to bring her children into another confrontation, but they remained the ultimate deterrent. "But first, we should find out the truth of these rumors. Ser Davos, would you?" He nodded. "I can see to it. I'll work with Varys if you wish. He's an expert at ferreting out secrets." Before Davos could leave, Sansa touched his arm gently. "Thank you, truly. I know this isn't your fight, yet you remain." Davos offered a tired half-smile, the lines of loss etched around his eyes. "I stand for the living and for peace. If there's a chance to have both, then I'll help see it done." With that, he departed, boots echoing in the corridor. Tyrion lingered only a moment, bowing to Daenerys and Sansa, then headed out to instruct Varys on the matter. That left Daenerys alone with Sansa. The flickering torchlight danced on the stones, painting shadowy shapes. Daenerys inhaled, the cold northern air filling her lungs. "It appears peace never lasts long. We've only just begun to heal, and already someone tries to stir new troubles." Sansa's mouth pressed into a thin line. "The North will not desert you in this. I might have my own realm to tend, but we stand as allies. I won't watch another war tear apart the land if I can help it." She paused, her eyes meeting Daenerys's. "We'll coordinate. If these rebels approach our borders, we'll repel them. If you need more men, I will send them." Daenerys felt a surge of gratitude and relief. For once, she would not face such threats alone. Her advisors were strong, but the realm was vast and fractious. To have the North as a genuine ally, not just in words but in action, changed everything. "Thank you," she said softly. She allowed herself to believe, if only for a moment, that perhaps they had turned a corner. A new day dawned in Westeros, one in which she and Sansa could stand side by side without animosity or hidden daggers. The thought warmed her as much as the spiced wine ever could. They parted, and Daenerys made her way to her quarters. Grey Worm waited by the door in stoic silence. She offered him a nod, letting him know all was well. Inside, she found the simple furniture, the flickering fireplace, and a table strewn with maps and ledgers. Exhaustion weighed heavy in her limbs, but her mind was too busy for sleep. There were letters to send, instructions to give. Yet, as she sat at the edge of the bed, she realized something she never had before. She felt a sense of relief, not fear, that guided her next steps. She had not knelt to the North. She had, however, embraced the truth that only by respecting their autonomy could she hope to truly unify the realm under the idea of peace. That night, Daenerys dreamed of wide green fields and seas of grass that shimmered under a summer sun, a memory of a land she had not seen since crossing the narrow sea. She dreamed of dragon wings overhead and a whisper of wind that carried the scent of home. And then she saw the Red Keep in flames, but instead of the satisfaction she once thought she might feel, she saw heartbreak. In the dream, the spires crumbled and the people scattered. She reached out to help them, but they recoiled in fear. She felt the whip of a lash, not on her back but across her heart, as though punishing her for the sins of her father, the Mad King. She awoke in a cold sweat, heart hammering against her ribs, unsure how to interpret it all. But as she listened to the wind howling outside, she recalled Sansa's calm acceptance and let herself breathe again. She would not let the fear define her. In the following days, messages flew between Winterfell and the seats of various great houses. Daenerys penned letters under the guidance of Tyrion and Varys, proclaiming a desire for peace, reaffirming her rightful place on the Iron Throne, but also announcing that the North would henceforth be recognized as independent under Sansa Stark. She chose her words carefully, mindful of how the lords of Westeros might react. She expected some to chafe at the notion that the North, so vast, would stand apart. Perhaps the lords of the Vale or Dorne might wonder if they, too, could claim such status. But if they did, Daenerys intended to address it as it arose. For now, her focus was stabilizing what remained of a battered realm. Sansa, meanwhile, oversaw the repair of Winterfell's walls, the distribution of supplies to her people, and the reinforcement of the gift that the Night's Watch historically used. The White Walkers might be gone, but winter still lingered and the North faced the aftermath of devastation. The two women spoke often, exchanging quiet words or letters about trade routes, farmland, the best ways to feed their people. Sansa's knowledge of the northern resources was invaluable, and Daenerys found herself respecting Sansa's keen intellect more and more. One early afternoon, as Daenerys took a short walk through Winterfell's courtyard, letting the pale winter sun warm her face, she saw Arya Stark practicing with a bow, loosing arrows at a straw target. Her aim was sure, each arrow thudding right at the heart. Daenerys approached slowly, not wanting to disturb her. After the third arrow landed dead center, Arya lowered her bow and turned to face Daenerys. "Your Grace," she said simply, though her tone held no servility. Arya had never been one to bow and scrape. Daenerys nodded in acknowledgement. She took in the young woman's slight frame and calm, steely eyes, remembering that this same girl had been the one to vanquish the Night King. "I see your aim is as sharp as ever." Arya tilted her head, not quite smiling. "Must stay sharp. The world doesn't stop throwing enemies at you, does it?" "No, it does not." Daenerys glanced around. Some Unsullied were present, practicing drills with a small band of northern soldiers. "Are you staying long in Winterfell?" Arya shrugged. "For now. But eventually, I intend to travel. The open road calls to me, and I have other things I want to see, explore. But I promised Sansa I'd stay while we rebuild. At least until we know there's no immediate threat." Daenerys nodded. "You love your family. You stand by them." "I do." Arya looked Daenerys in the eyes with a frankness that could be unsettling. "And Sansa respects you more now because of the choice you made. You've earned a measure of trust from her." That's not something she gives freely. She's been hurt too many times. Daenerys didn't flinch from Arya's scrutiny. I know, and I don't take it lightly. I hope to do right by her and by the North. She knows, Arya replied. She can see it, or she wouldn't stand by you. Then, with a slight downward tilt of her mouth, Arya scooped up another arrow. I'm glad you're giving the North its freedom, truly. We Starks have had enough forced upon us. And I think we have more in common than you might guess. Daenerys raised her brows, curious. Such as? We've both fought against impossible odds to survive. Arya set the arrow to the bowstring, pulled back in a smooth motion, and loosed. It struck the target with a solid thud, just off-center. And we've both been forged by fire, yours literal, mine less so, perhaps, but still. We share a certain stubbornness. Daenerys allowed herself a small smile. Arya's frankness was refreshing. May it serve us well, because there will always be those who seek to undermine what we've built. Arya nodded, retrieving another arrow from the barrel. When the day comes, you'll have me as an ally too, as long as you protect my family. She drew back the arrow, paused. That includes Jon, if he ever returns. Daenerys's eyes clouded for a moment at the mention of Jon. He was gone beyond the wall, tending to matters of the Free Folk's relocation. Their relationship had changed after the revelation of his parentage, after everything else. She missed him and still cared for him, though she wasn't entirely sure where they stood. But one thing she knew, she wanted him safe. I will, she promised softly. Arya let the arrow fly, and it landed near the center again. She lowered the bow, seeming satisfied. Without another word, she turned back to her practice, leaving Daenerys to contemplate all that had been said. The waves of conflict that had once separated Daenerys and the Starks seemed to be receding, replaced by a cautious trust. She felt a quiet pride in the alliances she was forging, alliances not through terror or conquest but through mutual respect. That evening, Daenerys dined in the smaller hall with Tyrion, Sansa, and a handful of close advisors. The talk was subdued but companionable, focusing on practical matters like supply lines and the threat of banditry in the war-torn areas south of the Neck. Sansa mentioned a desire to send more shipments of grain to the Riverlands, which had been heavily ravaged by both the undead and the vestiges of war. Daenerys agreed to coordinate efforts, dispatching unsullied patrols to protect the caravans. It was the kind of discussion that might have seemed tedious in another life, but now it felt vital, the true work of maintaining stability. Sansa proposed a small yet symbolically meaningful action to tear down the battered Bolton banners still hidden in some storerooms and burn them in a ceremonial gesture marking the true end of their tyranny. Daenerys supported the idea wholeheartedly, remembering Ramsay Bolton's brutality and how he had tormented both Sansa and the North. The next day, they carried it out. A modest gathering took place in the courtyard. A brazier was set ablaze, and Sansa, with a flint and steel, lit the corner of the oldest, most tattered Bolton banner. The flames licked across the flayed man's sigil as watchers observed in solemn silence. Daenerys stood nearby, a fur cloak draped over her shoulders. The wind tugged at her hair as if eager to carry away the ashes of the past. When the last of the banner dissolved into cinders, a quiet cheer went up. The shadow of Ramsay Bolton, a name that once inspired horror, was finally consigned to memory. Sansa turned to Daenerys, her eyes reflecting the orange glow of the brazier. "Thank you for standing with me," she said. Daenerys nodded. "I stand with you, Lady Stark, as I hope you will stand with me in the days to come." Sansa allowed a small, grateful smile. "I will." In the following week, letters arrived from Dorne, declaring a cautious acceptance of Daenerys's rule but inquiring what exactly the North's independence meant for the rest of the realm. The new Prince of Dorne, an older noble cousin of the Martells, hinted that if the North was free to stand apart, Dorne might consider renegotiating its own status. Tyrion read the letter with a wry sigh and rubbed his temples, muttering, "Of course. Nothing can ever be simple." Daenerys, however, refused to be dismayed. She replied that the North's historical claim to independence was unique, tied to its vastness, its severe winters, and its centuries-old legacy. She also pointed out that Dorne had negotiated special terms when it first joined the Seven Kingdoms centuries ago, and that if they wished to discuss those terms anew, she would gladly receive them in King's Landing to talk. She closed with an appeal to peace. "We have all lost too much," she wrote. "Let us not tear ourselves apart further." She sent the raven south, unsure of what would come next. Amid these diplomatic efforts, Daenerys felt the stirrings of a deeper purpose. She had tried so long to break the wheel. Now she was forging something entirely new, a realm where alliances could be negotiated rather than enforced at Draga Point. She still commanded her dragons, of course, and they remained a powerful deterrent. But it was not fear she wished to inspire. She wanted, finally, to build the kind of world that would honor those who had died to bring it into being. It was on a crisp morning that Sansa sought Daenerys in the library tower of Winterfell. Daenerys had retreated there, engrossed in ancient tomes describing the reigns of past Targaryen kings, seeking knowledge on how they handled rebellions without burning everything to cinders. The library was cool and musty, lit by narrow windows that cast beams of pale winter light onto the worn stone floor. Daenerys glanced up as Sansa approached, setting aside a thick volume. Sansa hesitated at the threshold, then stepped forward. "I didn't know you enjoyed reading about history." Daenerys gave a small shrug. "I do. I always wanted to learn from the mistakes of my forebears, not repeat them." She ran a hand over the tome's cracked leather cover. "My father, the Mad King, was not a man who studied the past for its lessons. He let madness and cruelty guide him." Sansa nodded, her gaze sweeping the shelves lined with books. "It's wise of you. They say those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it." She paused, then inhaled. "I've come to speak with you about the next steps for the North. Now that we have official recognition, I need to think about a coronation of sorts. The North hasn't had a proper crowning in centuries, not since Torrhen Stark bent the knee to Aegon the Conqueror. I want to do it right if we are to honor our heritage." Daenerys listened with genuine interest. "I understand. You're to be the first monarch of an independent North in a very long time. You want ceremony." Sansa gave a small, almost self-conscious smile. "Something that unites the northern houses and marks a new era, but also something that acknowledges this alliance with you." She brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I was thinking of a gathering at the Godwood where the old ways are strongest. We can do this quietly, or we can invite the other houses from the south. But I don't wish to burden you or your armies." Daenerys rose from her seat, letting the book close with a soft thump. "I would be honored to attend if you'll have me. It may show the realm that we stand united, you and I, even in our new arrangement." Sansa's relief was evident in the relaxation of her shoulders. "Thank you. I'd like that." She looked around as though double-checking that they were alone. Then her voice became softer. "I have learned many hard lessons in these past years, Daenerys. The chief one is that trust is a fragile thing, so easily broken and so difficult to mend. I'm still learning how to trust you. But I'm glad we've come this far." Daenerys felt a pang of empathy. She reached out, gently touching Sansa's forearm. "So am I. Perhaps in time we can rebuild what was broken. At least we can set an example for the rest of Westeros." Sansa placed her hand over Daenerys's, giving the barest squeeze. "Yes, that is the hope." In the ensuing days, preparations began for Sansa's coronation in the Godwood. It would be a modest ceremony, given the austere temperament of the North, but lords and ladies from across the land were invited to attend. Some had initially balked at the notion of traveling across icy roads during winter's tail end, but the significance of the event was too great to ignore. A new queen in the North had not been crowned in living memory. When the day finally arrived, the sky was pale gray, clouds drifting lazily as if uncertain whether to unleash more snow. The heart tree in the godswood stood crowned in frost, its red leaves vibrant against the stark winter. Dozens of northern lords had gathered, forming a loose circle around the weirwood, while Sansa knelt at its base. She wore a cloak of white and gray, trimmed with the direwolf sigil. The faint breeze stirred the auburn braids that framed her face. Daenerys stood among the onlookers, accompanied by Tyrion, Grey Worm, and a small retinue of Unsullied who had volunteered to stand by their queen. Jon was still beyond the wall, but Daenerys felt a sense of kinship with this place. She recalled the first time she had been in the Godswood, how foreign it felt, and now she sensed a quiet peace emanating from it. The murmur of voices hushed as the ceremony began. An elderly northern priest intoned ancient words that Daenerys didn't fully understand, references to the first men, to the children of the forest, and to the old gods. The air seemed to crackle with significance. Sansa closed her eyes, as though communing with something deeper than mortal comprehension. Then, in a solemn gesture, the priest placed a simple circlet of bronze and iron upon her head, a design older than silver or gold, hammered into the shape of swirling vines and dire wolf heads. It was not lavish, but it radiated a certain primal dignity. "Arise, Sansa Stark, Queen in the North," the priest declared, his voice echoing through the silent grove. Sansa rose to her feet, her expression composed but filled with quiet pride. The lords and ladies bowed their heads. For a moment, Daenerys recognized in Sansa a mirror of herself, the weight of responsibility settling upon slender shoulders, the knowledge that leading was not simply a matter of wearing a crown. It was a burden and a duty. After a moment of hush, Sansa turned to face the gathering. "My lords and ladies, I vow to serve the North and protect it with all that I am," she said, her voice firm and clear. "We stand in the old ways, remembering the first men, yet we live in a new time, a time of alliances. We stand alongside the Targaryen queen, Daenerys Stormborn, breaker of chains, who has promised us peace and granted us freedom. May this day mark the beginning of a new age, not just for the North but for all of Westeros." With that, Sansa gestured Daenerys forward. The silver-haired queen stepped closer, feeling the eyes of the North on her. She did not avert her gaze. Instead, she let them see her resolve. "I stand by my vow," she said softly. "The North shall remain free under its rightful ruler. Long may she reign." A gentle wave of applause followed, subdued yet genuine. Daenerys inclined her head to Sansa, and Sansa inclined hers in return. In that moment, the centuries of old enmity seemed to fade, replaced by a hesitant optimism. They might never forget the tragedies of the past, but now they had a chance to shape the future. Later, a modest feast was held in the great hall of Winterfell, though it was nowhere near the riotous feasts of old. The North was still rebuilding, and there was no room for lavish abundance. Still, the long tables were laid out with hearty fare, roasted venison, black bread, onions, carrots, beets, and mead that tasted of fresh honey. Lords and ladies mingled, exchanging stories of the war and speculations about the future. Daenerys found herself speaking with Lord Royce of the Vale, who congratulated her on the wise decision to let the North stand apart. She even exchanged polite words with Lady Waynwood, who asked many questions about the dragons. Tyrion made the rounds, sipping his wine in moderation for once, trying to soothe any lingering concerns about the realm's stability. He deployed his wit carefully, earning a few chuckles from lords who had once scorned him. Meanwhile, Sansa presided at the head table, her newly bestowed crown a visible sign of her authority. At one point, in the hush of quiet conversation, Daenerys approached Sansa and murmured, "How do you feel, Your Grace?" She used the royal address with a soft smile, acknowledging Sansa's new status. Sansa's eyes flicked to her crown. "A little heavy, if I'm honest, but I'll bear it." She managed a small, genuine smile. "I am grateful for your presence, Daenerys. Truly. Without your support, I'd likely be fighting a new war right now, not celebrating a coronation." Daenerys laid a hand on the table's edge. "We have the chance to shape something better, Sansa. I don't intend to squander that. Nor I." Thus, the evening wore on, weaving a tapestry of cautious hope. Conversations about trade routes, mutual defense, and the logistics of caring for orphans who had lost their parents in the war floated through the hall. Laughter occasionally sparked, not the boisterous roars of old but the soft, relieved kind that signaled a people slowly daring to imagine that things might be all right. Over the next few weeks, Daenerys prepared to depart Winterfell for King's Landing, where she intended to handle the matter of the rebellious Lannister faction and also begin the real work of rebuilding the capital. The Red Keep needed repairs, the city walls were battered, and the population was scattered. It wouldn't be easy, but she knew that staying idle in the North would solve none of that. Still, she wanted to finalize a few points of alliance with Sansa before departing. They walked together near the gatehouse one morning, where the freshly fallen snow gave the ground a crisp, white cover. The winter sun hung low, offering only weak warmth. Sansa pulled her fur cloak tighter, glancing at Daenerys. "I'll send Lord Glover's men to join your march south if you wish. Just as a reinforcement." Daenerys shook her head kindly. "I appreciate it, but let them stay. Your own borders need them. My unsullied Endothraki, along with the Stormlanders who swore to Gendry, should be sufficient for now. Besides, this rebellious faction is said to be small. I want to approach them diplomatically first." Sansa lifted a brow. "Diplomatically?" Daenerys gave a tight smile. "I have learned through hard experience that not every problem can be solved with dragonfire. If they can be persuaded to lay down arms and recognize my rule, then so be it. I'll not punish them needlessly so long as they do not force my hand." Sansa studied her thoughtfully, then nodded. Perhaps we both have changed more than we realize. They reached the stables where the black stallion Daenerys had ridden in the north pod at the snow. Nearby, the dragons soared overhead, their shadows rippling across the snowy courtyard. Winterfell's residents still shuddered at the dragons, but no longer did they cower in open terror. The beasts had fought for them after all. Rhaegal let out a distant roar echoing off the ramparts. Daenerys turned back to Sansa. Once the capital is in order, I hope you'll consider visiting, if only to confer on matters of state. It might help quell rumors of discord between us. Sansa inclined her head. I will. Perhaps in the warmer months when travel is less treacherous. A brief silence passed between them. Then Sansa extended her hand. Daenerys took it and Sansa's grip was firm. Safe travels, Daenerys, she said, softly but sincerely. I look forward to hearing of your successes. And if trouble stirs in the south, know that the north will not abandon you. Daenerys felt her lips curve in a warm smile. She gave Sansa's hand a quick squeeze before releasing it. Thank you, your grace. May your reign bring prosperity to the north and may we share in that prosperity together. And with that, Daenerys left Winterfell. The wide gates opened, revealing the white road stretching beyond the castle walls. The Unsullied marched in disciplined ranks, the Dothraki rode with quiet anticipation, and Daenerys herself rode at the head of the column, Tyrion at her side. Grey Worm guided them carefully, watching for any sign of danger. Overhead, Drogon and Rhaegal circled, their silhouettes passing over the snowy fields. Atop her horse, Daenerys glanced back one last time at the ancient seat of House Stark. The battlements and towers jutted into the pale sky, a testament to a history older than her own. She remembered the days when she had believed she would conquer it all, the entire continent, with no compromise. And now she left it in peace, having yielded the North's sovereignty to its own queen, Sansa Stark, a woman who had faced cruelty and heartbreak yet emerged stronger, wearing the crown of her people's respect. The swirl of conflicting emotions within Daenerys's chest settled on an unexpected note of hope. They rode south. The land beyond Winterfell lay blanketed in snow, a quiet testament to the harshness of the season. Yet there were faint signs of a coming thaw. Small rivulets of melt trickled along the edges of the King's Road, and here and there, hardy winter flowers poked through the crust of snow. Daenerys considered those flowers a reminder that life persevered despite the cold. In the same way, the realm could persevere and even flourish if given the chance. As the journey stretched on, the road took them past farmsteads still reeling from the undead invasion. Daenerys paused in a few places, distributing what supplies they had. Tyrion diligently recorded names and locations, promising that once they reached King's Landing, more aid would be sent north. It was slow going, but Daenerys would not leave these people to starve. She felt the weight of her duty, but it was a burden she accepted willingly. On a crisp afternoon, they reached the ruins of Moat Cailin, the ancient stronghold that guarded the neck. The towers and walls were half sunken into the bog, but Daenerys could sense their old, brooding power. They made camp there, not wanting to risk traveling through the swamp at night. Daenerys wandered the broken ramparts, remembering stories that Ser Jorah had once told her about how the North had repelled enemies time and again at this spot. She breathed in the damp air, aware that her alliance with the North was something entirely novel in the tapestry of Westerosi history. She gazed up at Drogon and Rhaegal as they soared overhead, their roars echoing across the marsh. Once, she had believed her dragons would be the instruments of conquest for all of Westeros. Now they were the guardians of a new peace she was trying to forge. She thought of Sansa, newly crowned, weaving alliances in the cold halls of Winterfell. She thought of the people who looked to both of them for protection. The road ahead was uncertain, but she felt a steady flame within, a determination to prove that she could be a just ruler, that Targaryen might mean something more than fear and fire. That night, she slept under the stars, the distant calls of swamp birds lulling her into a dreamless slumber. She woke at first light, breakfasted on salt pork and coffee, then rode on. Each day that passed brought them closer to the southern territories where the weather grew slightly milder, though still tinged with the edge of winter's last grasp. They began to see more signs of human habitation, small villages, mills, and watchtowers. Some recognized the Targaryen banners or the Unsullied phalanx and stepped out to watch with wary curiosity. Daenerys greeted them with waves or brief words, letting them see her as more than just a rumor of dragons. When they finally crested a ridge that gave a view of the distant crownlands, Daenerys felt her heart tighten. There, far on the horizon, was King's Landing. Smoke still rose in faint wisps from the blackened buildings. The scars of warfare had not healed. Walls battered by siege engines, neighborhoods burned by dragon fire. Guilt churned in her, recalling her fury unleashed. She reined in her horse, letting her eyes linger on the battered city. Tyrion came alongside her, his face grim. "We'll have our work cut out for us, your grace," he said. "Rebuilding. Mending hearts, if such a thing is possible." Daenerys inhaled, her breath trembling just enough for Tyrion to notice. "I will do what must be done, no matter the cost." She pressed her lips together. "We can't let them starve or go without shelter. We'll divert resources even if it means personal sacrifice. I refuse to be a queen of ashes again." Tyrion nodded solemnly. "Then let us begin. We'll show them that you are a different ruler now that your reign is not built on fear alone." And so they proceeded, descending toward the city that had known drag of flame and destruction. And in Daenerys' heart, a small spark of determination glowed, fueled by the knowledge that she had made a difficult choice in the north, one that cost her a piece of her ancient birthright yet yielded a chance at true peace. She clung to that hope, recalling Sansa's calm, measuring gaze, and the simple words they had exchanged. If two women shaped by war and heartbreak could find a way to coexist, maybe there was hope for Westeros after all. Within a few days, Daenerys and her army passed through the city gates. The small folk eyed them with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Daenerys rode with her head held high, carefully guiding her horse through the cramped streets. She saw the rubble, the fire-scorched walls, the destitute faces. She swallowed hard, vowing again never to forget what her wrath could do, and what a queen's mercy must accomplish. At the Red Keep, the courtyard was a bleak sight, partially collapsed in places, though repair crews had done some work. Daenerys dismounted, scanning the structure that once symbolized her family's might, then fell to ruins under her own siege. She looked to Tyrion. "Let us get to work," she said. "We'll house the homeless within whatever stable buildings are fit. We'll establish a soup kitchen, something. No one will freeze or starve on my watch." Tyrion gave a brisk nod, already sending runners to notify the men. Grey Worm began organizing the Unsullied to clear debris, setting them to tasks of building rather than war. The Dothraki looked on, uncertain, but some of their number joined in, hauling stones with the Unsullied. Daenerys' dragons roost near the half-intact towers, their presence looming over the city as a reminder that power could be used for creation as well as destruction. The first day was spent just establishing order. Daenerys met with what remained of the city's leadership: minor lords, merchants, and a handful of surviving city watch officials. They wore weary expressions, battered from years of conflict. She offered them a straightforward pledge: that the crown would do everything possible to feed and shelter the people, and that reforms would be made to ensure they had a voice. She was not naive enough to believe it would be accepted easily. Fear and resentment simmered under the surface, but it was a start. Meanwhile, news of the North's independence rippled through the capital, stoking lively debate. Some saw it as an outrage. How dare the Starks break away? Others believed it might spare the realm further devastation. Daenerys didn't hide from the questions. She explained that the decision had been made for the greater good of unity and peace. Slowly, the small folk realized that their queen was not the fiery conqueror they had dreaded. Whether that realization would turn to genuine loyalty remained to be seen. Amid these efforts, scouts brought word of the rumored Lannister rebellion. They confirmed that a petty lord named Damian Lannister, a distant cousin of the late Tywin, was rallying a small host in the Western Hills. Daenerys summoned Tyrion to her solar that evening. The sky outside was violet with dusk, and a single brazier glowed in the corner. Tyrion read the scout's report, his lips twisting. "It figures. Damian always was an arrogant ass, from what I recall. He'll promise the world to those who join him." Daenerys tapped her fingers on the table. "And the Iron Bank might back him if they believe he can restore Lannister power." "What is your counsel?" Tyrion set down the parchment. "Offer him terms of peace. Remind him the Targaryen queen is not alone. She has allies in the north, the Stormlands, the Vale, and possibly even Dorne. If he persists, then you bring the dragons." Daenerys' eyes flickered with an old anger. She wrestled it under control. "I will give him a chance, but only one. I've seen enough blood." She paused, catching Tyrion's gaze. "I need you by my side in these negotiations. You are a Lannister, after all." Tyrion inclined his head. "Yes, I will do my best to make him see reason. Although I fear reason isn't always enough." Daenerys exhaled. Then if he leaves us no choice, she did not finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air. Fire and blood. She hoped it wouldn't come to that. That night, Daenerys stood on the balcony of her partially rebuilt chambers, gazing at the city below. Torches flickered in the streets. Somewhere, a child cried out, a dog barked, the hush of the wind whipped past the walls. She thought of Sansa Stark standing among the white snows of the north, forging her own realm. They were now two queens, each striving in her own way to heal a land ravaged by darkness. Daenerys looked up at the stars. She recalled the day she had told Sansa that she would grant the north its freedom. It felt like a lifetime ago, though hardly more than a month had passed. That single choice had shaped everything that followed, forging a bond of trust where there had once been distrust and hostility. She allowed a small smile. Even if it meant letting go of the centuries-old claim of Targaryen dominion over the north, the price was worth paying. Far above, Drogon's sword, a silent silhouette against the stars. Regal followed, their forms graceful and free. Daenerys closed her eyes briefly, recalling the labyrinth of decisions that had led her here. She had been a conqueror in Essos, freeing slaves and toppling tyrants. She had believed her destiny was to unite Westeros under her rule no matter the cost. But the war against the dead had changed her, as had the love and loyalty she found among those who followed her. She discovered that strength was not always measured in how fiercely one could fight, but sometimes in how willingly one could yield. She opened her eyes. The cold wind tugged at her hair, as if reminding her of the North's presence in her life. Sansa was a queen now, not her vassal, but her ally. Perhaps someday they would stand together in this city, forging treaties that might last generations. Perhaps they would share counsel in times of crisis, as the old kings and queens never had, bridging the gulf between North and South. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Daenerys Targaryen believed in the possibility of a brighter dawn. She rested her hands on the balcony's ledge, gazing out over the quiet city. For now, that hope would have to be enough. She would face down Damian Lannister and any other threat that arose, not as a conqueror but as a queen determined to protect and serve. She thought of Jon Snow somewhere in the icy wastes beyond the wall and wondered when or if he might return. She thought of Tyrion, who had stuck by her side through thick and thin, and of Grey Worm, who had lost so much yet continued to fight for a better future. And, of course, she thought of Sansa Stark, who had shown her that trust could still be found even among former rivals. Inside her solar, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across the stones. She turned away from the balcony, stepping back into the chamber where her maps lay sprawled on a table. Tomorrow would be another day of rebuilding. Another day of negotiations, of penning letters, of seeing to the city's many needs. Another day of forging alliances and hoping that she could truly break the old cycles of hatred and mistrust. As she gazed at the map of Westeros, her eyes settled on the outline of the north. For so long, that swath of land had been just another piece of her inheritance, a region to bend the knee or be subdued. Now it was so much more. It was proof of her willingness to rewrite the old rules, to craft a realm where the storms of war might pass. And maybe, just maybe, that single gesture would resonate across the land, lighting the path to peace. She closed her eyes, letting the flicker of the fire lull her senses. She pictured Sansa standing in the godwood, the bronze crown nestled in her auburn hair, and remembered the hush of the onlookers as the old priest proclaimed her queen in the north. She recalled Sansa's steady voice when she vowed to stand with Daenerys in future trials. The memory stirred warmth in Daenerys's heart, a hope she would cling to in the coming battles, be they fought with swords, words, or ideals. Peace was a fragile seed, easily crushed by the boots of the powerful. But if tended with care, it could grow into something lasting. Daenerys Targaryen intended to nurture that seed, no matter the storms that threatened it. She had the will, the power, and at long last, an ally in the north who shared her vision. Perhaps that was how the wheel would finally break, not in one grand conquest, but in 1,000 small acts of courage and compassion, forging a Westeros where fear was not the coin of the realm. She moved away from the map, banking the fire before retiring for the night. Tomorrow, she would don her mantle of leadership, face the mistrust in King's Landing, and begin the long process of reconciliation. Tomorrow, she would continue the work that she and Sansa Stark had started together. But tonight, in the quiet hush of the Red Keep, she allowed herself the luxury of a rare smile. Sometimes, the most radical action a dragon could take was to lay aside the flames and offer an open hand. And in that gesture, a new world might yet be born. Daenerys Targaryen stood at the edge of the balcony in her partially restored solar, gazing upon the city of King's Landing as early morning light painted the rooftops in gentle hues of gray and faint gold. She could smell the brine of Blackwater Bay on the breeze. a reminder that the capital, even in its wounded state, was a hub of commerce and possibility. If she squinted, she thought she could see the faint outlines of ships moving about in the distance, but the angle was awkward and the sky was still half dark. It had been a fortnight since she and her retinue arrived from the north, and each day had been filled with the grueling yet essential work of governing. Indeed, the city was changing, and Daenerys was determined that it would be for the better. Yet she could not pretend that trust and stability had come easily or that the ghosts of the past had simply vanished. Her mind often turned northward, remembering the hush of Winterfell's halls and the solemn vow she and Sansa Stark had exchanged. She drew in a breath and let it out slowly, feeling the early chill on her skin. Once, her entire life had revolved around the pursuit of a single iron seat, an obsession handed down by her ancestors and crystallized by her own hardships. But now that she was here, having claimed King's Landing in a storm of fire and blood, she found herself grappling with the question of what her reign should truly mean. The peace with Sansa, her willingness to give the North its independence, had tested Daenerys' sense of entitlement. Yet it had also relieved a tremendous burden, freeing her from the rigid pattern of old conquests. With each passing day, she felt more certain that establishing a new kind of rule was not just a possibility but her duty. A soft knock on the chamber door drew her from her reverie. She called for the visitor to enter, and Tyrion Lannister stepped through, still fastening the buttons of his doublet. His hair was longer now, curling a bit around his ears, and he seemed thinner, as though the responsibilities of the past years had steadily worn him down. He offered Daenerys a small bow of the head, his expression somewhere between worry and a trace of optimism. "Good morning, Your Grace," he said, crossing the room. His voice held a reserved energy. "I trust you slept well?" Daenerys smiled a little, though it didn't fully reach her eyes. Well enough. In truth, her dreams were not always restful. She often woke with her heart pounding, flashes of old battles or half-formed visions lingering at the edges of her consciousness. Yet she saw no use in discussing nightmares with Tyrion when the realm itself needed waking from so many real ones. "What news?" she asked, pivoting toward him. Tyrion's mouth pressed into a thin line. "We received a raven this morning from scouts we sent westward. Damian Lannister and his small host are on the move. They've seized a minor holdfast near the Gold Road and declared it for House Lannister restored. He's apparently mustering men, no doubt luring Sel's words with the promise of Lannister gold." Daenerys exhaled, turning her gaze back to the city below. She could see the faint sparkle of the sun on broken spires. "Do we know how large his forces might become? Or whether the Iron Bank has truly decided to support him?" Tyrion shrugged, a gesture of uncertainty she had seen from him often these days. "The scouts place his numbers at a few hundred at best, maybe 1,000 if he manages to buy enough swords. As for the Iron Bank, nothing is confirmed, but they'd be fools not to hedge their bets. They might provide small loans, enough to let Damian appear a more credible contender. The bank rarely invests everything in one turn of the wheel, but even modest support could swell his ranks." Daenerys felt a stir of old anger deep within her chest. Once, she might have flown directly west with Drogon and Regal, reducing Damian's stronghold to ashes. But that was the old way, the old Daenerys. The woman who had burned King's Landing in her wrath, the woman who had allowed heartbreak and fury to guide her. She wrestled against the memory. Yes, she was still a Targaryen, still the mother of dragons, but she had resolved not to let fear be her only instrument. She recalled Sansa's face in Winterfell's great hall the moment Daenerys had extended a hand instead of unsheathing a blade. That act of restraint had opened a door to a more enduring peace. "Then let us extend an offer," Daenerys said, keeping her voice calm. "If Damian Lannister is a sensible man, perhaps we can avoid bloodshed. Tyrion, draft a message in my name offering him clemency and safe conduct if he agrees to recognize my rule. Lay out the terms clearly. The alternative should also be clear: we will not allow a rogue army to rove the West unchallenged." Tyrion nodded as though relieved by her measured response. "Very well. I'll have the letter sent by Raven today. It may take a few days to reach him, but better than riding into open war blindly." Daenerys moved away from the balcony, her long silver-white hair swaying against her shoulders. She wore a simple dark dress, a compromise between her usual regal attire and the practical demands of a city under reconstruction. Her boots clicked against the stone floor as she approached the Solar's wide table where a map of Westeros lay pinned at the corners. She traced the route from King's Landing toward the western hills, eyeing the territory near Lannisport. "Let me know as soon as you receive any reply," she said softly. "In the meantime, we proceed with our efforts here. How goes the rebuilding in Fleabottom?" Tyrion studied her for a moment. "Slow but steady. We've begun clearing more rubble, and some of the wealthier merchants have pledged funds to help rebuild the housing. The soup kitchens, as you ordered, have been set up in 3 key locations. We've also managed to secure shipments of grain from the Reach thanks to the new warden's cooperation. He coughed lightly. Which reminds me, Gendry Baratheon has arrived. He's waiting in the throne room. He brought a small retinue from Storm's End. Daenerys felt a wave of relief. Gendry, newly legitimized and appointed Lord of Storm's End, had proven loyal in recent months. Though he lacked the typical upbringing of a lord, his sincerity and honesty were refreshingly straightforward. "I'll speak with him now," she said, sparing one last look at the map. "Thank you, Tyrion." He bowed once more, leaving Daenerys to gather herself. She closed her eyes briefly. She pictured the new alliances blossoming across the realm, the Stormlands under Gendry, the Vale stabilized under Lord Royce, the North under Sansa, the Riverlands still leaning on Edmure Tully, the Iron Islands presumably under Yara Greyjoy, and Dorne, tentatively supportive so long as her reign did not threaten their autonomy. Each region had its own scars, its own pride, and forging unity among them was a task every bit as challenging as raising a city from ruin. Yet Daenerys pressed on. She descended the corridors of the Red Keep, passing through damaged archways and half-plastered walls. Laborers toiled to relay stone, and the echoes of hammers and saws resounded in the once grand halls. Some of the tapestries had survived, but many had been burned or torn away, leaving bare stone exposed to the chill. Guards in Targaryen livery stood at intervals, saluting as she passed. She made her way to the throne room, its massive doors propped open to let in light. Inside, she found Gendry standing near the base of the Iron Throne's dais. He was dressed in plain but well-made garments of dark leather and cloth, a cloak pinned at his shoulder with the stag sigil. Once a blacksmith's apprentice in Flea Bottom, he seemed more comfortable with a hammer in hand than a formal cloak, yet he bore himself with a certain confidence. He bowed politely as Daenerys approached. "Your Grace," Gendry said. "I came as soon as I received your summons." Daenerys offered a slight smile. "Thank you, Lord Gendry. I trust Storm's End is faring better now that the worst of the winter is passing." He nodded, pushing back a stray lock of black hair. "We've had our share of troubles, but the harvest from last autumn should see us through until spring. The new alliances help, trade with the Reach is re-established, and some of the smaller lords are returning to their keeps. I also wanted to report that we have a few shipwrights working on refurbishing the fleet. It's not as large as your ancestors' navies, but it's something." Daenerys took a moment to appreciate Gendry's earnestness. He was still learning the intricacies of lordship, but his heart seemed fixed on bettering his lands. "Good," she said. "We'll need a strong Stormlands if we're to keep the realm stable. With the rebellions in the west stirring, your presence here is timely. We have word that a Lannister pretender, Damian Lannister, is gathering forces. I may need you to coordinate with the Crown's forces if he doesn't stand down." Gendry exhaled, the corners of his mouth tightening. "A Lannister rebellion. I suppose I can't say I'm surprised. Tyrion once told me that House Lannister has countless cousins, all hungry for some claim to power." "Precisely. For now, we've sent a diplomatic offer. If that fails, I'll need the Stormlands to be ready." Daenerys gestured for Gendry to walk with her, leading him away from the dais. She found it disconcerting at times to linger near the Iron Throne. Its twisted metal spires seemed to reproach her with memories of how she'd taken it. "Aside from that, how are your people faring? The war took its toll on all, but your domain was spared some of the worst ravages." Gendry's expression grew solemn. "We have refugees from King's Landing, even from the Riverlands, crowding the roads. Some come seeking a new start, others simply pass through. We do what we can to feed them, but resources are thin. I'm hoping for some relief from your distribution programs here in the city. If I can bring back a promise of supply, it'd calm the Stormlander lords who fear famine." Daenerys listened carefully, mentally tallying the realm's resources. Grain, barley, salted fish, these items were in great demand everywhere. But if she played favorites, awarding extra shipments to one region, others would cry foul. She had to maintain balance or risk fracturing alliances before they truly solidified. "I'll speak with our quartermasters," she said. "We'll do what we can, but I can't promise as much as I'd like. The city's needs come first. Still, Storm's End will receive its fair share." Gendry nodded, a flicker of relief in his eyes. "Thank you. Truly, your grace. Whatever you can spare is appreciated." He paused, glancing around the throne room as though struck by the hush of the empty space. "This place, it feels different. Less grand." Daenerys understood. The last time Gendry had been in King's Landing as a nobody from Flea Bottom, the throne room had been a place of fearsome pomp. Now it was scarred, partially rebuilt, with scaffolding along the walls. "We're in a time of rebuilding," she said. "All around us. Perhaps the Red Keep's new shape will reflect the new shape of the realm. His gaze flicked to her face, a hint of admiration there. He bowed once more, then excused himself, presumably to find Tyrion or Grey Worm and settle logistical details. Daenerys watched him go, letting the echoes of his footsteps reverberate through the hall. She felt the old pang of her father's legacy, the knowledge that the Targaryen name still inspired both reverence and dread. But she had chosen a path that did not rely solely on terror. She wanted to be known as a queen who rebuilt more than she destroyed. She exited the throne room, weaving through corridors that led to an antechamber often used for council meetings. Already she heard the low murmur of voices within. Ser Davos Seaworth would be there, as well as Varys, if the eunuch had returned from his latest venture in the city. Grey Worm might attend if his duties allowed it. And, of course, Tyrion, once he dispatched ravens to Damian Lannister. As Daenerys stepped inside, she saw Davos and Grey Worm conferring over a rolled parchment. Both men looked up at her arrival, bowing with quiet deference. "Your Grace," Davos greeted, his accent rough as ever. The lines at his temples had deepened since the long night. "We were just discussing the security situation in the city. The Gold Cloaks remain understaffed, and many of them are new recruits, men with no experience handling the city's more unsavory elements." Grey Worm's posture was ramrod straight, his brown eyes steady. "The Unsullied can help patrol, but many of my soldiers are needed to protect the Red Keep and important storehouses." Daenerys settled into a tall-backed chair, crossing her legs beneath the table. "Then we'll need to bolster the Gold Cloaks with additional training. Perhaps the Unsullied can conduct an accelerated regimen for them. If the City Watch is unprepared, we risk chaos in these streets." Davos bobbed his head in agreement. "Aye, that might be best. Also, we've had a few small riots already, people fighting over bread or lashing out at merchants they think are hoarding supplies. Nothing large-scale, but it shows how tense the mood still is." Daenerys pursed her lips. "We must address their fears. If the people think the crown is holding back resources, they'll turn to violence. Have we posted the daily rations publicly so they know what to expect?" "Not yet," Davos replied, "but I'll see to it that we do. That might ease their suspicions." She nodded. "Good. And we must ensure fair pricing. I won't allow profiteers to extort the starving. If we catch merchants who break the price regulations, we fine them heavily or shut them down." Grey Worm inclined his head in acknowledgement, then stepped away to let a scribe record the queen's instructions. Daenerys knew that establishing law and order in a city this large was no simple feat. The destruction from the siege still echoed in every quarter. Entire neighborhoods gutted, families fractured. The famine might not be as catastrophic as some predicted, but it was pressing enough to keep tensions high. She recalled the villages she had passed on her way from Winterfell, how precarious their situations had seemed. At least in King's Landing, the crown could coordinate resources more directly. At that thought, the door opened once again, admitting Lord Varys in his customary silks. He bowed, though his expression remained impassive. He had grown quieter of late, but his watchful eyes were as keen as ever. "Your Grace," he said, "I bring further word on Damian Lannister." He revealed a scrap of parchment. "According to my little birds, he has approached certain Sellsword companies in Essos, one being the Silver Company. They're smaller than the Golden Company, but still dangerous if well-funded." Daenerys met his gaze with concern. "Has he succeeded in hiring them?" "My sources are uncertain. He's at least in negotiation," Varys responded. "If the Iron Bank invests a fraction of what they once provided to Stannis or the Lannisters, Damian could raise a surprisingly large force." A spike of frustration flared in Daenerys' chest. She forced herself to breathe slowly. "We'll await word of his reply to our message," she said. "If he refuses terms, we'll have no choice but to respond militarily. My dragons remain a powerful deterrent, but I will not resort to them unless absolutely necessary." Varys dipped his head. "Wise, Your Grace. In the meantime, might I suggest we engage in some diplomatic overtures with Bravos? If the Iron Bank sees that you're open to an equitable settlement of outstanding debts, perhaps they'll think twice about financing a rebellion." Daenerys felt a flicker of her old memories, owing the Iron Bank had once been a dreaded prospect, especially for houses short on gold. "Very well. Compose a letter offering them a new repayment schedule along with the Crown's guarantee that trade with Essos will flourish. Stress that we will not condone any seditious activity. If they want their gold, they'll find me more reliable than a rogue pretender." Varys bowed. "I'll prepare the letter immediately." The meeting continued for some time, addressing mundane yet crucial matters: distribution of fresh water, the repair of city walls, the integration of new City Watch recruits, and efforts to contact the scattered maesters who had fled the chaos. Each problem felt like a loose thread threatening to unravel the fragile tapestry of order. But Daenerys pressed on, her mind returning periodically to the north, recalling how Sansa might handle these same issues if faced with them. She suspected Sansa was dealing with her own share of troubles, rousing the northern lords to accept a more open trade policy, perhaps, or reaffirming alliances with the Vale. The difference was that Sansa governed a smaller population, far more homogeneous and loyal, whereas Daenerys had inherited a city that still bore the scars, literal and otherwise, of her conquest. When the council finally broke, Daenerys lingered, scanning over the parchments left behind. Her eyes traced lines of text about charred neighborhoods and missing persons. She ran a hand over her forehead, weariness tugging at her. She had expected that ruling after the wars would be challenging, but living it day by day was another matter entirely. She reminded herself that this was the burden of peace, the quiet, uncelebrated labor of rebuilding what had been destroyed, forging new trust in the hearts of people who had every reason to doubt. She drifted to a window overlooking the training yard. Down below, the City Watch recruits were sparring with wooden swords. Grey Worm observed, occasionally offering curt advice. The men wore battered tabards, a few holding battered shields. Daenerys recognized the grit on their faces. These were not highborn knights but common folk pressed into the Watch. Some had families to feed. If she failed them, their desperation would drive them to unscrupulous ends. A figure approached from behind. She glanced over her shoulder to see Tyrion, who cleared his throat quietly. "The ravens have been sent, Your Grace. Now we wait for a response, however long that might take." Daenerys stepped away from the window, her face set in determination. "And in the meantime, we keep building a better realm." Tyrion gave a faint smile. "Your resolve is admirable. Let's hope it's enough to weather the storms to come." Several days slipped by without word from Damian Lannister. Daenerys occupied herself with the daily tasks of governance, which seemed endless. She supervised the distribution of food in the worst-hit districts, convened with local healers to ensure the city had enough medicinal herbs, and debated with Tyrion and Varys over the best ways to encourage trade routes from the Reach. She found a fragile rhythm in the routine, though there was always a kernel of tension curled in her stomach, wondering when the next crisis would erupt. At last, late one evening, a raven arrived bearing a sealed scroll with the Lannister lion stamped in wax. The messenger delivered it to Tyrion, who hurried to Daenerys' solar at once. She was seated at a small wooden desk, poring over a ledger of the crown's finances, when Tyrion burst in. He bowed, handing her the scroll. Daenerys broke the seal and read. The letter was terse. Damian Lannister referred to himself as the true heir of Casterly Rock, and decried Daenerys as a usurper queen. He refused to recognize her authority, stating that no negotiation was possible until Daenerys remitted the Lannister lands and the seat of power to its rightful line. A snarl curled at her lip as she read. He claimed to speak for the memory of Tywin Lannister, ignoring that Tyrion was Tywin's lawful son. It was a brazen, unsubtle refusal. Tyrion watched her expression darken. "I gather it's not good news," he said dryly. She handed him the scroll to read. He skimmed it, his brow furrowing in disgust. "Well, that's certainly not a negotiation. It's a threat, and a poorly veiled one." Daenerys set her jaw. "Then he has made his choice. I offered peace, but he rejects it outright. We can't allow him to expand his influence unchallenged, or we'll be inviting more pretenders to rise up in every corner of Westeros." Tyrion tapped the parchment against his palm. "Agreed. What would you have us do?" She took a breath, reining in the anger that threatened to spark. "We muster our forces. The Unsullied remain our core, supplemented by the stormland levies Gendry can provide. If need be, I will ride out with Drogon and Regal to underscore the seriousness of this matter. But I won't lay waste to an entire region to root out one rebellious lord. We'll proceed cautiously." Tyrion nodded. "I'll begin drafting the orders tonight. If we march within a week, we can reach the Gold Road before Damian has time to truly fortify. Varys' little birds can keep track of his movements." Daenerys' mind spun with the logistics, rations for the soldiers, safe routes for traveling with dragons, how to ensure King's Landing remained secure in her absence. But she felt certain they must act. A direct challenge to the crown, especially one claiming Lannister legitimacy, could not go unanswered. She stood from her desk, the ledger of finances forgotten. "Then so be it," she said. Convene the War Council tomorrow at dawn. The next day, the War Council gathered in the largest intact chamber near the Red Keep's main hall. Map tables were brought in and spread with fresh parchments detailing the western roads. Daenerys stood at the head of the table, flanked by Tyrion, Grey Worm, Davos, Gendry, and a handful of lesser commanders. Varys lurked at the fringes, quietly observing. They planned their campaign. Daenerys insisted on bringing at least half of the Unsullied, leaving the rest to safeguard King's Landing. Gendry pledged a few hundred Stormlander knights and foot soldiers. They considered sending ravens to the Vale or to the Riverlands for aid, but Daenerys wished to avoid turning this into a sprawling conflict if possible. Edmure Tully might offer men, but that would require the crossing of numerous roads and supply lines, complicating matters. The Crown's strength, augmented by Gendry's men and the presence of dragons, might well be enough to quell Damian Lannister's ambition swiftly. Still, caution was wise. Damian might try to lure them into a trap. The memory of the field of fire from centuries past clung to Daenerys' mind, a single battle where dragons could decimate entire armies. She knew how potent that image was, yet she felt no satisfaction at the prospect of repeating such carnage. She wanted Damian to see reason or fail quickly, sparing innocent lives. We'll avoid reckless engagements, she emphasized. Tyrion, if there's any sign of Damian's men surrendering, we'll offer them clemency. This is not a war of extermination. Tyrion agreed. Understood. We want his men to lay down arms. If we force him into a corner where death is the only outcome, he'll fight all the harder. But if his bannermen realize they can surrender without losing everything, they may turn on him. Over the next several days, preparations moved swiftly. Blacksmiths hammered out additional spears and swords for the city watch in case trouble arose while the main army marched west. Grey Worm organized the Unsullied, ensuring they had sufficient winter gear, though spring was slowly taking hold. Gendry's knights arrived in small groups, their banners bearing the stag emblem of Baratheon. Though they were fewer in number than Daenerys might have hoped, they were disciplined enough. Before long, word spread that the Queen would march west to deal with rebellion. Daenerys sensed the city's mixture of relief and anxiety. Many still feared her dragons, worrying that if she was gone, the city might slip into chaos again, or that she might return in a fury if forced to do so. But she had little choice. Letting Damian Lannister fester unchecked would signal that anyone could defy the crown. Even in the best of times, that was dangerous. Now, with the realm still reeling from wars and winter, it could be fatal. The morning of departure arrived. Dawn light bathed the courtyard as Daenerys mounted a tall gray mare. She wore practical leathers beneath a cloak embroidered with the Targaryen sigil, though it was not overly ornate. Around her, the Unsullied formed ranks, their spears gleaming. The soft clank of armor from Gendry's knights mingled with the horses' whinnies. Tyrion sat astride a sturdy brown gelding, looking less confident in the saddle than on foot, but he managed. Grey Worm, ever disciplined, led the formation. Varys, for once, chose not to ride with the vanguard. He would remain in King's Landing to coordinate intelligence unless called upon. Ser Davos would journey with the main host, offering his seasoned counsel. As Daenerys prepared to give the signal to move out, she glanced skyward. Drogon and Rhaegal circled overhead, silhouettes against the golden morning. Their roars reverberated across the city, stirring awe and a measure of fear in the onlookers who had gathered to watch the royal host depart. Daenerys felt a pang in her chest, recalling the day she had first brought dragons to these walls, under far darker circumstances. Now, she hoped their presence would prevent needless slaughter rather than unleash it. The gatehouse opened, and the column began to move through the streets. Small folk peered from windows, some bowing, others watching warily. Daenerys kept her head high, projecting the confidence of a ruler who knew her cause was just. She did not wave or smile. This was not a joyous procession but a measured march. The hoofbeats echoed on the cobblestones, mingling with the subdued hush of the city's breath. They crossed the city gates and set out along the roads leading westward, the dragons soaring overhead in slow arcs. The crisp spring air carried the scent of damp earth where snow had melted. Along the roadside, green shoots broke through the thinning frost, signs that the bitter winter was receding. Daenerys wondered if this spring would also bring a thaw in the hearts of those who had once feared her. She spurred her mare forward, leading from the front. For days they traveled, each night making camp along well-trodden routes. Scouts ranged ahead, bringing back reports of small Lannister patrols. Some peasants reported seeing men in red and gold cloaks passing through, demanding taxes or conscripting farmhands. Daenerys's anger flared each time she heard these tales, but she forced herself to remain calm. The time for confrontation would come. They had to pick their battles carefully, ensuring minimal harm to the innocent. Tyrion spent his evenings drafting more letters, dispatching ravens to local lords, urging them to stay loyal to the crown or risk the dragon's wrath. Davos handled supply distribution, making sure each camp was well provisioned. Gendry rode with his knights, personally checking on their readiness. Grey Worm maintained strict discipline among the Unsullied, posting rotating watches so no surprise could catch them unaware. Daenerys often walked among the tents, speaking with the soldiers, letting them see her not as a distant conqueror but as a flesh-and-blood leader who shared in their hardships. At times, she soared with Drogon. Mounting her largest dragon remained a fearsome thrill, and it served practical purposes too. From the air, she could scout the terrain. Rhaegal followed of his own volition, occasionally letting out a trumpeting roar that seemed to shake the clouds. Seeing the land from above reminded Daenerys of how vast Westeros was. Rolling hills, winding rivers, pockets of farmland, and scattered villages. She spotted more than one burned-out hamlet, though whether it was the result of old battles or new raids was hard to say. The realm's wounds did not simply vanish after the long night or the fall of Cersei. Soon, they approached the crossroads where the Gold Road branched off toward Lannisport. The region's hills rose in gentle slopes, green starting to return after winter's departure. Daenerys and her advisors convened at midday, scanning the horizon. Our scouts say Damian Lannister's main force is entrenched a few leagues west, Grey Worm reported. He has watchers on the hilltops likely seeing us approach. Tyrion peered through a small spyglass he borrowed. A wise man would see the dragons and run, he said, lowering the instrument. But Damian may be counting on reinforcements, either Sellswords or some misguided minor lords who want to see a Lannister in power again. Daenerys considered their next step. We won't charge blindly. We set camp here, secure a perimeter, and send a herald under a flag of truce to see if Damian is ready to talk after all. Do you think he'll listen? Gendry asked. She shook her head slightly, remembering Damian's arrogant tone in the letter. Doubtful. But let it never be said we refused a chance at peace. If he ignores it, we proceed. They made camp in a shallow valley ringed by outcroppings of rock that offered partial protection from surprise attack. The Unsullied set up neat rows of tents while Gendry's knights formed a secondary perimeter. Daenerys oversaw the positioning of archers and lookouts, mindful that Damian might attempt a night raid. The day wore on, and a single herald carrying a white banner and accompanied by a pair of unarmed riders set off to deliver Daenerys's final offer of clemency. Late that afternoon, the herald returned, and the look on his face told Daenerys all she needed to know. He delivered his report. Damian Lannister refused to let me speak more than a few words. He said, tell your foreign queen that the West bows to no Targaryen pretender. Let her come and die on Lannister spears if she wills it. Then he had his men escort us away. A hush fell over Daenerys's commanders. Tyrion pressed his lips together in frustration, and Davos muttered an oath under his breath. Daenerys, for her part, felt a cold clarity settle in her chest. Damian intended to fight. Night crept over the camp, but no assault came. The men slept in their armor, pikes at the ready, while watchfires burned around the perimeter. Daenerys herself found restless sleep in a small command tent, haunted by the notion that she might soon unleash dragons upon men wearing Lannister crimson, men who might have families or who had simply been coerced. She tried to remind herself that war, though sometimes avoidable, was not always in her hands. Damian had chosen to defy the crown, and if she did nothing, the realm's fragile peace might crumble. A queen could not appear weak against open rebellion. At dawn, the sun rose behind a veil of thin clouds. The air felt tense, expectant. Daenerys donned light armor reinforced with leather, her Targaryen cloak pinned at her shoulders. She stood amidst her commanders, looking to Tyrion for guidance. He indicated a rise in the terrain where they might form a battle line. Grey Worm reported that the Unsullied were ready, stoic as ever, shields and spears in perfect alignment. Gendry's knights were forming ranks, though the younger men among them looked apprehensive. From a distance, dust rose against the western sky, evidence of Damian's own formation. The clang of metal carried faintly on the breeze. Daenerys could see glimpses of red and gold banners moving atop the low hills. Her heart thudded in her chest. No matter how often she had led armies before, this moment always sparked a mixture of adrenaline and regret. She wanted to avoid bloodshed, but Damian's choices left no alternative. She felt Drogon's presence overhead, the occasional flick of his wings casting a swift-moving shadow across the field. Regal circled to an emerald figure against the pale sky. They moved out in disciplined order, crossing the valley and ascending a gentle slope. Daenerys rode at the forefront, Tyrion off to one side, Grey Worm leading the Unsullied from the center. Gendry's knights fanned out on the flanks. The sight of so many spears, so many hoofs striking the ground, lent a grim pageantry to the moment. Atop the hill, Damian Lannister's host waited. Daenerys counted perhaps 800, 900 men. A cluster of mounted knights near the center must be Damian himself and his chief supporters. They waved red and gold banners depicting the Lion of House Lannister. When the armies were within shouting distance, the lines halted. For a few heartbeats, there was only the rustle of wind through tall grass. Daenerys considered one final attempt at words, but Damian had made it clear he wouldn't listen. A single trumpet sounded from the Lannister lines, and their men began to advance at a slow march. Sellswords, mercenaries, perhaps some forced conscripts. On Daenerys' side, Grey Worm gestured with his spear, and the Unsullied braced shields, forming a locked wall of steel. Gendry's knights shifted, preparing to charge. Daenerys drew a breath, then spurred her horse forward a few paces. She raised her voice, projecting it across the field. "Damian Lannister, last chance, throw down your arms and you will be spared." Her words echoed, but there was no immediate response. Instead, she heard a shrill whistle from the enemy lines, and archers let loose a volley of arrows. At that moment, Daenerys' hope of a bloodless resolution vanished. "Shields!" Grey Worm barked, and the Unsullied snapped their shields up, forming a barrier that most of the arrows clattered against. A few found gaps or struck the ground harmlessly. Gendry's knights withdrew slightly, wary of a second volley. Daenerys' anger twisted in her gut. Damian had not even deigned to respond. He had opened with an attack. So be it. She wheeled her horse around, scanning the skies. Drogon and Regal roared overhead, eager and restless. Without another word, Daenerys urged her mare back toward the safety of the lines. Then she dismounted and strode to a small rise, where she clambered atop a boulder. She lifted a hand, signaling Drogon. The huge black dragon descended, landing with a thunderous impact that rattled the ground. He lowered his head, allowing her to climb onto the ridges along his neck. She felt the heat radiating from his scales, the massive power coiled in his muscles. Tyrion, from below, shouted instructions for the infantry to hold formation. The Lannister lines had begun to advance more swiftly, men in battered plate or leather surging forward with swords and spears. Daenerys exhaled, steeling herself. She nudged Drogon, and with a ferocious bellow, he launched into the air, flapping his massive wings. Immediately, archers from Damian's side tried to track her, sending another volley skyward, but Drogon climbed swiftly, many arrows missing altogether. A few found their mark, bouncing off his scaled underbelly or lodging in the leathery membrane of his wings, though not enough to fell him. From her vantage in the sky, Daenerys beheld the battlefield in stark clarity. The glint of sun on shields, the swirling red cloaks, the resolute line of Unsullied. Gendry's knights prepared to sweep around the flank. She spotted the cluster of horsemen behind the main body, undoubtedly Damian's retinue, waiting to see if they might exploit a gap. Daenerys guided Drogon with subtle shifts of her body, angling for a pass over the advancing Lannister ranks. She fought against the memory of another day, when she had unleashed this terror upon King's Landing itself. No, this would not be the same. She intended to break their charge, not slaughter them mercilessly. "Dracarys," she commanded softly, and Drogon spewed a torrent of flame across an unoccupied swath of the field, a warning shot meant to scatter the forward ranks. Fire licked the tall grass, sending men stumbling back in panic, dropping their weapons. A few were caught by the flames, screaming as they fell. Daenerys bit her lip, trying to ignore the horror of it. She had to deter them. She circled around for another pass, giving them time to throw down their arms if they chose. Yet a portion of Damian's forces continued pressing forward, either too terrified of their own commander or too consumed by zeal. Below, Grey Worm led the Unsullied in a disciplined march, shields locked. They braced for the clash. Daenerys saw Damian's infantry slam into the shield wall. The first line of attackers found no weak point. The Unsullied had been trained from birth to stand firm. Spears darted out from behind the shields, felling men as they flailed. Gendry's knights pounded in from one side, crashing into the flank. The enemy line wavered, hundreds turning to meet this new threat. Yet Damian's cavalry remained behind the main body, biding its time. Swooping low, Daenerys scanned for Damian. She glimpsed a man wearing gilded Lannister armor at the back, flanked by 4 or 5 knights. That must be him. She guided Drogon downward, but more arrows whistled, and she was forced to rise again. From the corner of her eye, she spotted Regal diving into the fray from another angle, unleashing greenish flames that scattered the rearmost ranks. The roars of dragons and the screams of men blended in a cacophony that rattled Daenerys' nerves. Her heart pounded painfully. She wanted this over quickly, an overwhelming show of force that would break their lines and force a surrender. Below, the Unsullied pressed forward, cutting a swath through the disorganized foot soldiers. The field was chaos. Smoke, flame, wounded men crawling. Some dropped their weapons, raising their hands in surrender. Daenerys saw Unsullied troopers binding prisoners, pulling them out of the melee. Gendry's knights carved a path, unhorsing pockets of enemies. She felt a flicker of hope that this might end soon without a wholesale massacre. Then she noticed movement on the far side of the field. Damian's cavalry, perhaps 50 strong, broke from the rear. They spurred their horses, galloping around the flank in a wide arc. Daenerys realized with a jolt of alarm that they aimed to strike at the command area, where Tyrion and Davos stood. Tyrion was not a warrior, and though some guards surrounded him, it might not be enough to fend off a mounted charge. She signaled Drogon with urgent pressure. "Fly! Quick!" she hissed. Drogon responded, beating his wings and veering toward that flank. But cavalry moves fast, and Daenerys feared she wouldn't arrive in time to protect Tyrion from a lethal charge. She peered down, heart hammering. Damian, in gilded armor, led the charge at its head, sword raised high. This, it seemed, was his bold gamble, to cut off the Queen's leadership and so panic. Tyrion's guards hurried to form a makeshift line of spears. Davos drew his sword, though he was never the best fighter. The cavalry thundered closer. Desperate, Daenerys urged Drogon into a steep dive. Arrows shot up from Damian's men as they saw the dragon approach. 1 or 2 embedded in Drogon's wing, making him shriek in pain. But the great beast continued to plunge downward. Daenerys gritted her teeth. If she let Drogon loose with flame, she risked burning Tyrion and her own men. She had to be precise. With an earth-shaking impact, Drogon slammed into the ground just ahead of the cavalry, whipping his tail and snapping his jaws. Flames gushed from his maw, directed at the open space to the side of Damian's riders rather than directly upon them. The explosive display was enough to break the horse's nerve. Many beasts reared, throwing their riders or bolting. The charge fractured in an instant, men shouting in panic as they fought to retain control of their mounts. Damian himself was thrown when his stallion bucked violently, crashing hard to the ground in a cloud of dust. Seeing an opportunity, Daenerys leapt from Drogon's back. The adrenaline of battle roared in her ears. She landed less gracefully than she'd have liked, but she found her footing. A few of Damian's knights tried to regroup. One charged at her, sword raised. Grey Worm, arriving with a contingent of Unsullied, intercepted him, their spears punching through his armor in a swift thrust. Another knight rushed forward, only to be tackled by one of Gendry's men. Dust and smoke filled Daenerys' vision. Damian was on his knees, gasping for breath, his gilded helmet askew. He tried to rise, staggering. Daenerys moved closer, her eyes locked on him. She could sense the swirl of the battlefield around her, flashes of steel, the cries of the wounded. But in that moment, her focus was singular. Damian Lannister had threatened the peace of the realm, defied her offers, and nearly killed her closest advisor. She clenched her fists, aware of Drogon's presence looming behind her, hot breath steaming in the cool air. Damian managed to yank off his dented helmet, revealing a face contorted with pain and fury. Blood trickled down from his scalp. He lifted his sword, but his arm shook. "Foreign witch," he spat, voice ragged. "You think you can hold the West by terror?" Daenerys advanced another step. Around them, Unsullied and Stormlander knights subdued the last pockets of resistance. Some of Damian's men were fleeing, others lay dead or wounded. The stench of burning grass and flesh bit at Daenerys' nostrils. She stared at Damian, heartbreak warring with anger in her chest. "I offered you peace," she said, her voice trembling with intensity. "You refused." He sneered, blood on his teeth. "There can be no peace with your kind." His knuckles whitened on the hilt of his sword. "I'll die as a Lannister of the Rock. Then you choose death." The words left her lips, and she felt a hollow resignation behind them. Once, she might have reveled in a rebel's downfall. Now it only felt like necessity. He lunged at her, a desperate slash. Daenerys sidestepped, drawing the short blade at her hip. She was no expert swordswoman, but Damian was half-dazed from his fall, and her reflexes, honed by countless skirmishes, guided her. She deflected his clumsy strike, pivoted, and drove her blade into a gap in his armor near his shoulder. He gasped, staggering backward, blood blooming. Grey Worm rushed up, spear in hand, to protect his queen. But Daenerys jerked her blade free as Damian collapsed to his knees, eyes glazing in shock. She didn't speak, only stared down at him. She saw in his gaze the unwavering conviction that she was a monster, an invader. It chilled her to realize that no matter what she did for the realm, some would never see her as anything but a tyrant. Damian coughed, blood spattering his lips. The sword fell from his grasp. In a final act of spite, he tried to lunge again. Grey Worm stepped forward in a heartbeat, driving his spear through Damian's chest. The rebel lord gave a shudder, eyes rolling back, and went still. For a moment, the battlefield seemed to hush around them, save for the distant cries of the wounded and the crackle of dying flames. Daenerys wiped her blade on the grass, her breathing ragged. She gazed around. The fight was all but ended. Hundreds of Damian's men lay dead or wounded. Scores more were surrendering, dropping their swords in terror as Unsullied and Stormlanders closed in. Tyrion, unhurt but shaken, approached with Davos at his side. The moment Tyrion saw Damian's fallen form, he exhaled in relief, perhaps relieved the rebellion's figurehead was finished, or simply grateful to be alive. Drogon growled, shifting his weight, hot exhalations causing the grass to waver. Daenerys placed a hand on his flank, calming him. A swirl of smoke drifted across the field. She turned in a slow circle, taking it all in, the bodies, the burned patches of land, the captives being rounded up. So much destruction for the ambition of one man. And yet it could have been worse, she thought. She had not unleashed a full storm of dragonfire. The majority of Damian's host had time to surrender. Only those who pressed the attack to the bitter end had met that end. In that moment, she was acutely aware of how close she teetered to the edge of repeating old atrocities. One slip, one wave of fury, could have incinerated them all. But she had chosen a measured path. It felt neither triumphant nor entirely guiltless, just a grim necessity in a land still learning how to heal. Nearby, Gendry cantered up on his horse, covered in dust, an expression of muted relief on his face. "It's over," he said. "They're laying down their arms by the dozen." Daenerys sheathed her blade, her voice low. "Good. Then we'll bind the prisoners and treat the wounded. No needless cruelty. Let them see we are not butchers." She paused, meeting Gendry's eyes, then Grey Worm's. "We are here to preserve the realm, not raise it." Grey Worm nodded, though his jaw remained tight. He motioned for the Unsullied to fan out, securing the area. Tyrion touched Daenerys' arm, stepping close enough for his voice to be private. "We'll have to decide how to deal with all these prisoners," he said. "Some were sellswords. Others were perhaps forced into service. We can't simply let them walk away without any vow of loyalty." Daenerys nodded, fatigue settling on her. "We'll sort them. Those willing to swear fealty to the crown can live. The rest, we'll see if any impetus remains for further defiance. I want no more spilled blood than necessary. Tyrion studied her carefully as if trying to gauge her resolve. Understood, Your Grace. The day wore on as the chaos of battle transitioned into the grim work of aftermath. Daenerys moved among the survivors, ensuring that the worst injured received some attention from the healers. She issued commands for the respectful treatment of the dead. Among them, Damian Lannister lay with his gilded armor stained red. She ordered his body set aside for proper burial, though some might have argued he deserved none. Yet she was determined to show that even traitors would not be desecrated. Mercy, or at least dignity, might serve as an example to all. The next morning, a subdued hush fell upon the encampment. Smoke from the still smoldering patches of grass drifted across the plain. Ravens circled, feasting on the remnants of death. The stench was pervasive. Daenerys gathered her high command in the large command tent. Tyrion, Davos, Gendry, and Grey Worm attended, along with a handful of other officers. Varys had arrived at first light, having apparently traveled through the night to witness the battle's outcome. We have several hundred prisoners, Tyrion began, addressing the group. Some are injured, some are not. By the looks of it, maybe half are Sel's-words. The rest were Westermen or forced conscripts. Many claimed they were conscripted at sore point. A few vow they were only guarding their homes. And some say they pledged to Damian out of old loyalties to House Lannister. Daenerys stood near the large map spread upon a makeshift table. We will not hold them indefinitely, she said. We'll release those who swear fealty, but they must forfeit any claim to arms until we confirm they're sincere. As for the Sel's-words, offer them a choice, swear loyalty or face exile across the narrow sea. If they ever return in arms against the crown, they'll be treated as outlaws. The group murmured agreement. Davos scratched at his beard thoughtfully. What of any local lords who backed Damian? We'll summon them to pay homage or relinquish their lands, Daenerys replied. Tyrion, you'll identify which houses participated. Anyone who publicly declares loyalty to the crown and to House Targaryen will be allowed to keep their seat, but heavily fined. If they refuse, they lose everything. Tyrion looked uncomfortable but did not voice objection. Gendry nodded, then cleared his throat. We should also consider how this affects the overall stability of the West. House Lannister itself is, well, with Jaime and Cersei gone and Tyrion here, the line is complicated. There's Kevin Lannister's offspring, but many perished in the wars. The region needs leadership. Tyrion's eyes flicked to the ground. I suppose that falls to me as the last surviving son of Tywin Lannister. But I hold no desire to sit at Casterly Rock, especially when my queen needs a hand in King's Landing. Daenerys set a thoughtful gaze upon Tyrion. You could rule the rock through a regent or caretaker of your choosing, ensuring it remains loyal to the crown. That might be the best way. The West needs stability, and House Lannister, properly guided, could provide it. Tyrion hesitated, as though the thought of returning to the seat of his father's power unsettled him deeply. But he nodded. Yes, I'll see it done. I'll appoint a trusted steward to manage day-to-day affairs, someone who won't let the region slide back into rebellion. The council finalized other details, healing the land, re-establishing trade routes, ensuring no pockets of Damian's supporters lingered. By the time midday sun baked the battlefield, Daenerys felt the weight of exhaustion nearly crush her. But she trudged on, overseeing the sorting of prisoners. Most who could stand in the presence of a dragon queen without cowering in terror ultimately chose to swear fealty, especially after seeing Damian's fate. Daenerys accepted their oaths, her face a mask of stern resolve, while Drogon lay curled in the background like a silent reminder of consequences. When the final counts were tallied, the rebellion had cost Damian's host at least 400 men. Daenerys' side had lost fewer than 100, with another 100 or so injured. A brutal exchange, but not as ruinous as it could have been if she had unleashed dragonfire indiscriminately. She tried to find some solace in that fact. By the third day after the battle, they had begun burying the dead and organizing the prisoners for transport back to King's Landing or to local Western lords who had stayed loyal. Daenerys stood on a small rise near the mass graves, gazing at the rows of earthen mounds. She thought of the chaos that had seized Westeros time and again, the War of the Five Kings, the Long Night, her own conquest. Now this. She prayed that these horrors might soon end, that she might steer the realm onto a gentler path. Tyrion joined her, silent for a time as they surveyed the scene. Finally, he spoke in a subdued voice. Did you see it in his eyes? Damian, I mean. The unwavering belief that you were nothing but a monster. Daenerys nodded. I did. And it won't be the last time I see that in someone's eyes. Tyrion sighed. You spared far more of his men than many conquerors would have. It might not change the minds of all, but some will remember." She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the press of tears she wouldn't let fall. "I'm doing what I can. If I had burned them all, I'd be no better than the worst of my forebears." She opened her eyes, scanning the horizon. "Now, we must ensure this region remains stable. Perhaps that, in time, will speak louder than the memory of this battle." They lingered a moment longer, the wind rustling the tall grass. Then Daenerys turned away, heading back to the command area. The future called, and the realm would not mend itself. Within another week, the situation in the west began to stabilize. Minor lords, upon hearing of Damian's defeat and death, swiftly proclaimed loyalty to the crown. Some arrived in person to offer oaths before Tyrion and Daenerys. Tyrion spent long hours conferring with local leaders, hammering out the terms of restitution for the families displaced by Damian's conscription. Gendry worked alongside them, learning from Tyrion's skill in negotiation. Daenerys took daily flights on Drogon, surveying the region for any signs of lingering pockets of rebellion. A few small bands of Sells-wards had slipped away, crossing the hills into the riverlands. She dispatched riders to warn Edmure Tully and the local lords, hoping to prevent them from regrouping. The dragons overhead served as a warning to all. The crown might be merciful, but it was not weak. At last, with Damian's rebellion quashed and an interim structure in place for governing the West, Daenerys prepared to return to King's Landing. She yearned to see if the city was faring better under the reforms they had begun. Before departing, she and Tyrion stood in a half-ruined courtyard of a once noble holdfast that Damian's men had seized. Workers bustled about, clearing debris. A spring breeze stirred Daenerys's cloak. She turned to Tyrion. "You'll take on the title Lord of Casterly Rock, at least formally," she reminded him. "Your regent, whoever you choose, can handle local affairs when you're in King's Landing. The people should have a symbol they can rally around, the rightful Lannister line, not a pretender." Tyrion's eyes flicked over the cracked walls, the remnants of a Lannister banner half-burned near the gate. "It's an odd feeling, to be sure. But if it helps secure peace, I'll do it. My father would be furious, no doubt, to see me in his seat with a Targaryen's blessing." Daenerys managed a small, wry smile. "Let him rage in the afterlife if he must. We concern ourselves with the living." "Yes," Tyrion said softly, "the living." They set off soon after. Daenerys led the column back toward the Gold Road, the prisoners who had not yet been farmed out in tow. Grey Worm and the Unsullied marched in disciplined rows, while Gendry's knights rode behind. Tyrion accompanied her, a pensive look etched into his features. Davos took charge of the logistic trains, ensuring that any leftover supplies were not wasted. The return journey took several days, during which Daenerys felt the tension in her shoulders slowly ease. They had faced the rebellion and stopped it from spreading. Yet she carried the memory of flame and blood, the knowledge that she had once again used dragonfire in war. It did not devour a city, but it was a reminder of how swiftly events could spiral. She wrote letters each evening, some addressed to Sansa in Winterfell, though she suspected the ravens might take a while to reach her. She let Sansa know that the rebellion was ended, that the West was stabilizing, and that she looked forward to meeting again, perhaps in King's Landing or Winterfell, to discuss further measures of unity. One afternoon, near the Crossroads Inn, Daenerys overheard a conversation among some of the Stormlander knights. They were speaking of the old rumors that the Targaryen queen was mad like her father, referencing the burning of King's Landing. Another knight retorted that she had just given Damian's men a chance to surrender. Some had survived precisely because she chose restraint. Daenerys pretended not to hear, but their words struck her. The realm still wrestled with her legacy, the horrific images of dragonfire unleashed on the capital. She might never fully escape that shadow, but she would not cease trying to be better. When at last the towering walls of King's Landing came into view, Daenerys felt an odd sense of homecoming. The city might still bear her scars, but it was her seat of power, the place she must protect and nurture. The gates opened, and her host entered to a mix of muted cheers and anxious stares. News of her victory over the Lannister rebels had preceded her, but so too had stories of another field set ablaze. She kept her gaze forward, determined, acknowledging no illusions about instant adoration. The column wound through the streets, eventually dispersing as soldiers returned to the city barracks or to their own dwellings. Daenerys and Tyrion proceeded to the Red Keep, where the remainders of reconstruction efforts were ongoing. Scaffolding lined the walls, masons applying fresh mortar to cracked towers. The moment Daenerys dismounted, Varys emerged from a courtyard, bowing with his usual composure. "Welcome back, Your Grace," he said softly. "I trust the matter in the West is resolved?" Daenerys brushed dust from her cloak. "Damian Lannister is dead. Most of his followers have sworn fealty. The rest are scattered. The rebellion is over." Varys nodded. "The city remains stable in your absence. The soup kitchens are still operating and the gold cloaks are better trained now. There have been fewer riots, though a few nobles have come whispering about the north. They wonder if you will continue allowing Sansa Stark her independence. Some fear it sets a precedent." Daenerys felt her spine straighten. She recalled her promise. The north was Sansa's, free of southern rule. "That is not changing," she stated firmly. "I will receive any who wish to question it, but they'll receive the same answer. The north is its own kingdom now." Varys bowed his head. "As you say, shall I prepare your solar? There are letters from Dorne, from the Vale, and from Old Town, all awaiting your review." She nodded, exhaustion tugging at her. "Yes, please, and have the steward bring water for a bath if possible. I need to wash the dust of the road away." As Varys departed, Daenerys climbed the partially repaired steps into the Red Keep. She glanced around at the courtyard, noticing new gardens being planted, the once blackened stone being scrubbed and plastered. The city still wore its wounds, but it was healing, slowly, day by day, and she would do everything in her power to guide it toward a more peaceful future. In the weeks that followed, Daenerys delved deeper into the art of governance. She spent long hours in council, finalizing pacts with the Iron Bank to prevent further meddling from bravos in Westerosi disputes. She oversaw expansions to the City Watch, strengthening the chain of command so that petty corruption might be rooted out more effectively. Above all, she took pains to demonstrate that her victory over Damian was a step toward stability, not a precursor to more violence. Slowly, the tension in King's Landing subsided. Markets reopened with greater confidence, and ships began to arrive more frequently in the harbor. Caravans from the Reach brought fresh produce, which helped alleviate the threat of hunger. Daenerys even attended small gatherings where local merchants toasted the crown's efforts to keep roads safe. She accepted their toasts with humility, keenly aware that the realm still bore deep scars. Tyrion, meanwhile, arranged for the official announcement of his lordship over Casterly Rock. Though he had no desire to leave King's Landing permanently, he named a cousin's son, one of the few decent Lannisters left, to act as steward under his guidance. That arrangement satisfied most of the Westermen, who preferred a known Lannister line to a distant regent with no blood ties. Daenerys signed off on it, hoping it would seal the region's loyalty. Every few days, Daenerys received letters from Sansa Stark. The new queen in the north wrote of repairing castle walls, forging trade deals with White Harbor, and exchanging envoys with the Vale. She also extended an invitation, a visit to Winterfell, once the snows receded enough for safe passage. Daenerys found herself smiling each time she read Sansa's cool, poised words. The tension that once defined their relationship had eased into a kind of respectful friendship. Daenerys wrote back in kind, promising that when the realm's affairs allowed, she would journey north again, or welcome Sansa to King's Landing. One afternoon, as Daenerys paced the rebuilt throne room, still not as grand as it once was, but serviceable, she felt a strange flutter in her chest. She recalled her dream of forging a new Westeros, one where fear did not rule every corner. Perhaps it was not just a dream. She considered Sansa's coronation the fragile new trust they had found. The realm was far from perfect. Dorne's prince remained prickly. The Iron Islands needed to be addressed more thoroughly now that Yara had nominally sworn allegiance, and the scars of King's Landing would not vanish overnight. But she sensed in her bones that the tide had turned. A group of petitioners entered the throne room, led by an usher. They approached with small gifts, hoping to secure trade licenses or settle border disputes. Daenerys climbed the steps of the Iron Throne, still jagged and imposing, though partly refurbished, and took her seat. The metal pressed cold against her back. She raised her chin, focusing on each petitioner's words, listening with care. She dispensed judgment, mindful of fairness, reminding them that the laws of the realm protected all, not merely the highborn. Now and then she saw flickers of gratitude on their faces, as if they were beginning to believe that a Targaryen queen could indeed bring justice. And so the days flowed into weeks, and weeks into a pair of months with no new rebellions stirring. Daenerys continued to correspond with Sansa, gleaning updates about the North's progress. She heard from Arya, too, in a brief letter that said she was wandering the roads with a small group of traveling companions, seeing more of Westeros. Jon Snow, as far as she knew, remained beyond the wall with the free folk, apparently content to keep his distance from the politics he had once been entangled in. Eventually, another invitation arrived from Sansa, urging Daenerys to come north during a small festival celebrating the breaking of the long winter. The roads were more navigable now, and it would be an opportunity for the lords of the north to see that the Targaryen queen truly respected their autonomy. Daenerys weighed the logistics carefully. Leaving King's Landing was never simple, but she sensed that forging a closer bond was worth the effort. She thought of the last time she had parted from Sansa, the handshake that marked their new accord. So she arranged her affairs, leaving Tyrion to manage the capital with Davos and Varys. Grey Worm would command a contingent of Unsullied to accompany her, more a ceremonial guard than a large army. Gendry would remain behind to handle matters related to the Stormlands. A sense of eager anticipation rippled through Daenerys, an echo of the journey she had taken before, but this time under far more hopeful circumstances. The day of departure arrived. Daenerys mounted her horse outside the Red Keep gates, flanked by a modest column of Unsullied and a few local knights. Drogon and Rhaegal, too large to be penned anywhere, soared overhead. Some small folk gathered to watch the queen depart, and a handful even cheered softly, such a contrast to the wary silence of months ago. Daenerys inclined her head in acknowledgement, thinking, "Let them see that I come and go without sowing destruction." They rode north again, passing many of the same landmarks she remembered from her last journey, the outlying farmsteads, the crossroads inn, the fringes of the riverlands. Here, she took a brief rest at Riverrun, where Edmure Tully greeted her politely. He assured her the Riverlands had seen fewer bandits of late, thanks to her efforts to quell rebellion in the west. After exchanging pleasantries, Daenerys continued on, traveling under clearer skies than before. The heartbreak of the long night felt more distant now, though the realm's memory would never erase it entirely. In time, they reached the familiar stretch of road leading to Moat Cailin, the gateway to the north. The swampy territory was somewhat less foreboding in spring, though the ancient fortress ruins still loomed like jagged teeth. There was no hostility here. Sansa had sent word to allow free passage. Daenerys found comfort in the open acceptance from the men guarding the pass. It took additional days to push onward through increasingly chilly winds. Even in spring, the north remained colder than much of Westeros. Daenerys wore furs over her cloak, recalling the earlier journey when winter had weighed heavily on the land. Now, the snow was thinner, patches of rocky earth visible in places. Her breath still formed wispy clouds in the early morning, but the intensity of the freeze had waned. Finally, Winterfell came into view, its ancient walls and towers stretching against a stark sky. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and Daenerys' heart quickened at the sight. Memories washed over her, the tension she'd first felt upon arriving, the silent stares of northerners who distrusted foreign queens, the battles that had been fought in these very courtyard walls. And the moment she had reached out to Sansa in a spirit of compromise, forging a bond that defied the realm's bloody history. They approached the gates, where guards in stark livery waited. But the banner above the walls was slightly different now, still the direwolf, but with subtle additions marking Sansa's new status as queen in the north. The gates opened, and Daenerys led her column inside. Northerners watched from ramparts and doorways, some wearing expressions of curiosity, others with stoic courtesy. A stable hand hurried to take Daenerys' reins as she dismounted. She felt the lingering chill in the air, the wind tugging at her hair. A small group emerged from within the courtyard to greet her. At the forefront stood Sansa Stark, wearing a dark gray gown trimmed with fur, a simple bronze andiron crown resting atop her braided auburn hair. Daenerys' breath caught slightly at the sight. Sansa appeared every inch the northern monarch she was, poised, unyielding yet not unkind. Behind her, Daenerys recognized a few northern lords and ladies, as well as Brienne of Tarth and Podrick Payne. Arya was not immediately visible, nor was Bran Stark, but Sansa's eyes were bright with recognition. Daenerys took a few steps forward, the Unsullied halting at her flanks. She offered a respectful inclination of her head. "Your Grace," she greeted, her voice echoing in the courtyard's hush. Sansa dipped her head in return. "Welcome to Winterfell, Daenerys Targaryen," she said, her tone warm but formal. "You've traveled far. We are honored by your presence." Daenerys allowed a small smile. "I'm grateful for the invitation. It's good to see the North flourishing." Sansa nodded. "We're recovering slowly but surely, thanks in part to the relief your alliances allowed." She motioned toward the keep. "Come inside. You must be weary from the road, and we have much to discuss." Daenerys followed her, passing through the familiar corridors and up the stone steps. The air was cooler here than at King's Landing, but it held a sense of life rather than despair. Tapestries and northern decorations were being restored. Servants bustled with a subdued confidence, offering Daenerys's retinue warm drinks and space by the hearth. Outside, she could hear the distant roar of her dragons as they circled overhead, some watchers below murmuring in awe or mild alarm. Soon enough, Daenerys found herself in the great hall of Winterfell, where a modest feast was laid out, far more generous than the last time when the North had been nearly destitute after the wars. Sansa took her seat at the head table, gesturing for Daenerys to sit beside her. The northern lords settled around them, as well as the key members of Sansa's court. The hall was not overly crowded, but the hum of conversation indicated that the North was eager to welcome the queen who had once been an uneasy ally. Sansa raised a cup of mulled wine. "To new beginnings," she said simply, her gaze flicking to Daenerys. "May the coming seasons bring prosperity to both our realms." Daenerys lifted her own cup, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "And may our friendship endure beyond all doubts and shadows." They drank, and the hall shared in a subdued cheer. Servants began to bring out dishes: roasted boar, thick stews, hearty bread. Daenerys sampled the food, recalling how starkly different the fare was here compared to the south. Yet she found comfort in its simplicity. As the meal wore on, she spoke in low tones to Sansa, exchanging updates about the realm. She recounted the short-lived rebellion of Damian Lannister, how she had quelled it with minimal destruction, and how Tyrion now oversaw the West's transition. Sansa nodded, absorbing each detail with quiet focus, occasionally asking pointed questions. When Daenerys inquired about the North, Sansa explained that rebuilding efforts continued, especially near the last hearth, which had suffered heavily during the undead invasion. The smaller houses rallied, exchanging labor and goods to ensure no one froze or starved. Sansa also mentioned that House Manderly was expanding the port at White Harbor, hoping to draw new trade from Essos. "Perhaps your alliance with Bravos could help," she observed. "If Bravosi traders find a welcome in White Harbor, we might see a boon in shipping." Daenerys agreed readily. "I'll ensure the Bravosi envoys know the North is open to commerce. Could help all parties involved." Through it all, Sansa's new crown glinted in the hall's firelight, a reminder of the path they had walked. Once, they had stood at odds, each suspicious of the other's intentions. Now they drank together, forging the future of Westeros not in the crucible of war, but at a banquet table. The swirl of conversation in the hall slowly faded into the background for Daenerys, who felt a rare sense of contentment. She pictured how Missandei would have smiled at seeing this day. Daenerys sitting with the queen in the North as equals, working toward shared prosperity. After the meal, Sansa guided Daenerys to the same tower room that had once hosted her. This time, the chamber was better furnished with comfortable chairs and thick carpets. A brazier glowed in the corner, keeping the chill at bay. The flickering light danced across Sansa's features, revealing a mixture of regal composure and quiet warmth. "I'm glad you came," Sansa said once they were alone. Her voice was gentler now, the formal edge softened. "I wasn't sure if you'd be able to leave King's Landing so soon after the rebellion." Daenerys settled into one of the chairs, grateful for the warmth of the brazier. "Tyrion and my other advisors can handle things for a time. I felt it was important to show the North and the rest of Westeros that my bond with you is genuine. There's been enough suspicion." Sansa nodded, crossing her arms lightly. She still wore her crown, but it somehow seemed a natural extension of her demeanor. "You've worked hard to change hearts. I admit I was not easy to convince, but I see now that you truly are committed to a different path." She paused, perhaps weighing her next words carefully. "I wrote to Jon asking if he might come south to visit. He's still beyond the wall, though he did send a brief reply, just saying he's well but not ready to return." Daenerys felt a slight pang at the mention of Jon. She had not seen him since before the final battle with the dead. His choice to leave for the far north along with the free folk had left her with a swirl of unresolved feelings. Yet she harbored no resentment. She understood that he needed time away from crowns and politics. "I hope one day he finds peace enough to return," she said softly, "whether as a visitor or something more." Sansa's eyes flicked toward the window where the faint moonlight cast a silver glow on the stone. "I think he carries a lot of guilt. So many died, so many secrets were revealed. His parentage, your rightful claim, everything he believed about himself was upended. And he never wanted to rule, as I recall. Daenerys nodded, remembering his reluctant acceptance of the crown in the north and how he had bent the knee to her despite the outcry of his people. Perhaps the free life beyond the wall is what he needs. I won't force his hand. Let him wander if he must. Sansa turned back to Daenerys, a faint sadness in her gaze. We have lost so much. Family, friends, illusions. I used to think the Seven Kingdoms would never be whole again. That we'd keep fighting, tearing each other apart until nothing was left. She managed a small, sincere smile. But seeing you here, your presence in Winterfell as a guest, not a conqueror, it gives me hope. Daenerys felt the corners of her lips turn up in a gentle response. Then let's nurture that hope. The realm deserves it after all it's endured. They spoke late into the night, discussing practical details, trade routes, vassal disputes, potential alliances with Dorne, the Vale's future stance. The conversation flowed more comfortably than Daenerys would have imagined a year ago. Finally, fatigue overwhelmed them both and Sansa rose, excusing herself with a polite bow of the head. Daenerys was shown to her quarters, a chamber warmed by a separate hearth. She lay down in a bed layered with furs, her mind buzzing with the day's events. As she drifted into sleep, she reflected on the journey she'd taken to reach this point. So many battles fought, so many sacrifices made. Granting the North its independence had once seemed unthinkable, but now it felt like the most natural choice she could have made. She thought of Damian Lannister's final, hateful glare and reminded herself that not everyone would ever accept her. But those who chose to see her actions, not just her name, might join her in building a stable, more compassionate Westeros. The next morning, Daenerys woke to pale sunlight filtering through the frost-rimmed window. She rose, dressed in a practical gown befitting the North, and ventured to the Great Hall for a simple breakfast with Sansa. They spoke again, lightly this time, about smaller matters, how the stable hands were coping with 2 dragons perched near the castle walls, or how well the new granaries were working in the outlying villages. There was no tension, no guarded barbs. Daenerys felt an unfamiliar lightness in her chest, as though the nightmares of her past were finally receding. Later, she walked the ramparts with Sansa, gazing out over the snow-dusted courtyards. Northerners moved below, attending to daily tasks, some glancing up at the 2 queens with nods of acknowledgement. The sky was bright, though a faint chill wind reminded everyone that winter was not so easily banished, even in spring. They paused at a lookout tower where Sansa folded her hands over the stone ledge. There's talk among my lords and ladies, some wonder if the Vale or Dorne might petition for similar independence. Have you heard such rumors? Daenerys nodded. Yes, I have. Some see the North's autonomy as a precedent. But I've explained the unique circumstances that led us here. If Dorne insists, we'll discuss terms, but for now, the Prince of Dorne seems content with partial self-governance under my broader rule. The Vale is similarly content, especially since the North is no longer demanding fealty from them as an overlord. She hesitated, scanning Sansa's face. I meant what I said. The North was an exceptional case, shaped by ancient tradition and the severity of its winters. Granting your freedom was not a whim. It was acknowledgement of that uniqueness. Sansa's eyes softened with gratitude. Thank you for reaffirming that. She glanced out over the distant horizon where pine forests stretched in a dark mass. For many in the North, that gesture sealed their trust. They know you aren't just another conqueror. Daenerys' gaze followed Sansa's, lingering on the landscape. She had once found the North harsh and unwelcoming, but now she saw its quiet beauty. Perhaps it was no surprise the Northerners were so fiercely independent, the land demanded it. I see it more clearly now, she said quietly. Why it matters to you. Why you had to fight so hard for it. Sansa gave a small, thoughtful smile. It matters to me, yes. But so does peace. I don't want another generation to grow up with the constant fear of war. Let the snows and dire wolves be enough adversity for us. Daenerys couldn't help a soft laugh. Let the lords of the South worry about how to pay for fancy tournaments and keep the bankers happy. Sansa joined in the quiet laughter. The wind carried the sound across the ramparts, and for a brief moment they were simply 2 women who had survived unimaginable trials, finding solace in the possibility of a better future. Over the following days, Daenerys spent time in Winterfell's library, consulting with maesters and scribes about ancient records. She joined Sansa in audiences with northern lords where she offered subtle encouragement toward trade and development. She also showed some of them the courtesy of letting them see Drogon and Regal up close, from a safe vantage, of course, so that they might respect her dragons rather than fear them as distant terrors. More than once, she caught the faint, odd smiles of northern children who never dreamed they'd see living dragons perched atop Winterfell's walls. One evening, a raven arrived from King's Landing bearing fresh updates. The city remained calm, the reconstruction continued, and Tyrion's negotiations with Bravos were progressing well. Daenerys read the letter in Sansa's solar, relief washing over her. A year ago, she would have found it impossible to leave the capital for so long. But trust was building, trust in her advisors, and trust from the people who no longer expected dragonfire to fall upon them at any moment. She turned to Sansa, who was reading her own missive from White Harbor. "Good news," Daenerys said. "Tyrion reports no unrest in the city. The trade caravans are reaching the Westerlands again. It seems everything is stable." Sansa nodded absently, scanning her parchment. "Indeed. White Harbor's port expansion is going well, and they invite Bravosi envoys to tour the facilities once complete. I suppose we should coordinate that. The North can offer more than just pelts and timber." Daenerys crossed the room to peer at the parchment. "Excellent. We can schedule a group of envoys to arrive when the harbor is ready. Bravos will be interested in new trade routes that bypass some of the southern seas. It might even make them more inclined to maintain peace so they can reap the benefits." They exchanged a satisfied nod. The synergy of their realms felt almost effortless now, a far cry from the tension that once simmered. Daenerys felt hope flutter in her chest, an ever-present companion these days. The storms of war had not vanished, but at least for now, the horizon looked clear. Eventually, Daenerys decided it was time to return to King's Landing. She could not remain a guest in Winterfell indefinitely. Sansa understood, though she urged Daenerys to come north again when autumn approached to witness how the harvest fairs were run in the north. They parted on the ramparts, the same spot where they had once regarded each other with so much guarded mistrust. Now, Sansa placed a hand on Daenerys' shoulder in a quiet gesture of friendship. "I'll miss you, you know," Sansa said softly. "I never thought I'd say that to a Targaryen queen." Daenerys smiled, feeling a lump in her throat. "I never thought I'd find such a friend in a Stark." She paused. "I hope someday Jon will return and we can all stand together. But if not, we'll build this realm on the foundations we've set." Sansa nodded. "May the old gods and the new guide you safely south." With that, Daenerys descended to the courtyard where her retinue awaited. The gates of Winterfell opened wide and she rode out with the dragons circling overhead. She turned for one last glimpse of Sansa standing atop the battlements, the wind lifting her red-brown hair around her fur-trimmed crown. A sense of sorrow and triumph mingled in Daenerys' heart, sorrow for all that had been lost, triumph for all they had built since. She pressed her legs to her horse's flank, urging it forward, the cold northern air filling her lungs. The Queen of the North would guard her land in freedom, the Targaryen queen would guard the rest of the realm with compassion and strength. The journey south was less burdened by the threat of conflict than before. The roads were safer, travelers more at ease. It still took time, but each passing village or wayfarer station offered a reflection of how much had changed since the darkest days. Some recognized Daenerys and greeted her kindly. Others merely stood aside, but with none of the hostility she once sensed. Drogon and Rhaegal remained a subject of awe, yet the fear was tempered by stories told of how the dragons now guarded the peace rather than visited destruction upon the innocent. When at last Daenerys crested the final ridge and saw King's Landing sprawled ahead, her heart swelled with a newfound sense of belonging. This was her seat, her city, not because she had burned it into submission, but because she was determined to care for it and help it rise from the ashes. She spurred her horse onward. The unsullied columns advanced, the banners swaying in the coastal breeze. Drogon soared ahead with a triumphant cry, as though heralding their return. Upon entering the gates, Daenerys saw more signs of rejuvenation, newly built homes, cleaner streets. A crowd gathered, curious or eager, as she passed through. Some men and women bowed, others reached out to cheer softly. She offered a nod, an encouraging smile. The hush that once accompanied her arrival was giving way to cautious warmth. "In tea." That moment, she felt that perhaps the name Daenerys Targaryen no longer evoked only fear. She guided her horse toward the Red Keep, where Tyrion, Davos, and Varys waited in the courtyard. Grey Worm's contingent brought up the rear. As Daenerys dismounted, Tyrion gave a neat bow and offered a wry grin. "Good to see you in one piece, your grace." She laughed softly, handing her reins to a waiting stable hand. "And good to see King's Landing not in flames." Davos chuckled, scratching his stubbled cheek. "We've managed to keep the peace, though we were getting worried about how long you might remain in the north." Daenerys glanced from face to face, each a trusted ally who had seen her at her worst and her best. "I wanted to ensure that bond was stronger than any rumor of division," she said. "And we succeeded. The North stands with us as a friend, not a subject." Tyrion's eyes flickered with admiration. "I've always believed forging alliances was more about trust than mere power." You've proven that, Your Grace. She exhaled, letting the tension of travel melt away. Now let's see how we can build on it. The realm is changing. Dorne, the Vale, the West, the Iron Islands, they all watch to see if this is truly a new age. Let's show them it is. They moved inside, Daenerys exchanging brief but heartfelt greetings with the staff and guards. The corridors were more complete than when she'd left, fresh tapestries, repaired walls. Torchlight reflected on smooth stone. In her solar, she found a stack of parchments requiring her seal, matters of trade, justice, and administrative reforms. Though the scope of the tasks might have once overwhelmed her, she approached them with a sense of purpose. That evening, a council was convened, bringing in representatives of various city guilds, minor lords, and the Watch Commander. They updated Daenerys on everything from wheat reserves to crime statistics. She listened intently, asked questions, and delegated tasks. Tyrion offered quips and remarks that kept the mood from growing stale. Davos interjected with practical wisdom, while Varys contributed subtle insights gleaned from his network. By the time the meeting ended, Daenerys felt the city's pulse beat in time with her own, an imperfect but living harmony. Late in the night, she stepped onto a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. The moon cast a ribbon of silver across the water. She closed her eyes, remembering the day she had stood on this same spot, burdened by rage and grief, poised to unleash final ruin upon those who had wronged her. But she had found a different path, harder in some ways, but more fulfilling. She remembered the hush of Winterfell's godwood, the moment she extended her hand to Sansa, the flicker of acceptance in the other woman's eyes. That single decision had rippled outward, changing everything. A sudden roar drew her attention skyward. Drogon and Regal flew across the moon's face, silhouettes of might and grace. Daenerys felt a rush of love for her children, beings of fire and wing who had shared in her triumphs and tragedies. They were still formidable, still capable of immense destruction. Yet they too had a part to play in guarding this fragile piece. She rested her palms on the balcony's ledge, the cool stone grounding her. The city exhaled softly below, lantern lights flickering among the streets. Somewhere, families gathered for modest dinners, children drifted to sleep under patched roofs, men and women planned for tomorrow's labors. They did so without the shadow of imminent war pressing on every side. Daenerys let a slow smile curve her lips. This was her realm, the place she had fought and sacrificed so much for, not to dominate but to nurture. She thought again of Sansa, crowned in the north, forging her own kingdom with a quiet determination that matched Daenerys's own. Two queens, each shaped by heartbreak, each resolved to break the cycle of fear. Perhaps that was how the wheel truly ended, by finding common ground and letting go of claims that no longer served the greater good. She inhaled the night air, savoring the salt tang of the bay. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The realm was large, its scars deep, but they would face those challenges step by step, forging alliances rooted in respect rather than subjugation. Daenerys Targaryen, mother of dragons, once known to some as the breaker of chains and to others as a harbinger of doom, had found a middle path that neither entirely forgot her past nor repeated its darkest shadows. And in the north, Sansa Stark's autonomy stood as a testament that sometimes the most courageous act of a ruler was not conquest, but compromise. In that quiet moment, with the city lying peaceful beneath a star-swept sky, Daenerys felt the warmth of hope stirring once more in her heart. She stood on the threshold of a new age, believing that the future of Westeros did not have to be written in blood. If a Targaryen queen and a Stark queen could make their peace, then perhaps, in time, the rest of the realm could follow. It was a fragile peace, but it was real, and it glowed like a single candle in the dark, enough to spark the dawn. She would keep the candle lit no matter how fierce the winds. And if winter ever came again, the realm would stand united to face it, not as forced subjects, but as allies in a land reshaped by mercy, unity, and hard-won trust. Daenerys Targaryen lingered on the balcony long after midnight, watching the moonlit sprawl of King's Landing. The torches dotting the harbor resembled scattered stars fallen to earth, flickering in the soft wind that carried a hint of salt from Blackwater Bay. It was the same balcony where she had once stood in the aftermath of a brutal victory, her anger and grief fueling her every breath. Now, though, the city beneath her bore a different face. Where once she had seen only smoldering ruins and fear, she now saw scaffoldings, half-built roofs, and scaffolding lamps that revealed workers toiling even late in the night. At the edges of her hearing, she could pick up the faint clang of hammers on wood, the constant rhythm of reconstruction that had become the metronome of her reign. She stepped back from the ledge, letting the curtains fall shut behind her. The solar was warm with candlelight, and a stack of parchments on the table reminded her that her duties never truly slept. Letters from across the realm awaited her seal or her scrutiny, news from Dorne's new prince, suggestions from the Citadel regarding the reintroduction of ravens in remote areas, fresh trade proposals from the Vale. After months spent nurturing a fragile peace, Daenerys had grown accustomed to the ritual of midnight reading. The realm rarely let her rest before midnight, and it often woke her before dawn. She took a seat at the table, rolling her shoulders to ease the tension that settled there every evening. A fresh pot of mint tea waited. She poured herself a cup, inhaling its fragrant warmth. Its steam curled into the air, and she allowed her shoulders to sag just a fraction, grateful for the fleeting moment of stillness. A queen might wear crowns and command armies, but she learned to cherish these little glimpses of solitude. Atop the parchments lay a short missive sealed with an unassuming dollop of plain wax, the letters St scrawled in the corner. It was from Sansa. Daenerys recognized the neat, controlled handwriting and felt a small twinge of anticipation. She couldn't help recalling her recent visit to Winterfell, the long conversations by the hearth, the sense of kinship they had forged. In many ways, that journey north had felt like a step into unknown territory, despite the fact that she had already fought the dead there. It was one thing to march into the north as an ally in war, quite another to visit as a friend and foreign ruler who had voluntarily recognized northern independence. Yet her stay had passed with surprising warmth. The memory of Sansa's genuine smile at the parting still lit a gentle spark within her. Now, Daenerys unfolded the thin parchment. Sansa's letter was brief but direct. "Your Grace, I write with gratitude for the generosity you've shown in affirming our trade agreement with White Harbor. Already, the Manderleys report improved relations with merchants from Bravos, who seem eager to expand commerce to new ports. The North stands on firmer ground each day, its people no longer worried about looming war or endless winter. I hope to return your kindness soon. Should you or your court officials wish to discuss further expansions, perhaps the sharing of maritime knowledge between the North and the Crown, I stand ready." I also enclose a separate note from Arya, who passed through Winterfell only briefly. She insisted I send it your way. Be warned that her words may be as blunt as her arrows. With respect and goodwill, Sansa Stark, Queen in the North. Daenerys smiled faintly at the mention of Arya's bluntness. She set Sansa's note aside, searching the stack of parchment for the enclosed missive. It turned out to be a single sheet folded into thirds, sealed with a dab of candle wax pressed by what looked like the flat of a knife. Carefully, Daenerys broke the wax and opened Arya's letter. It read, "Daenerys, Sansa says you're handling the realm better than most men who've sat the Iron Throne. I still think the best throne is a horse's saddle, but I suppose people need crowns to keep order. I've been roaming about, seeing the corners of Westeros that were once swallowed by war. It's strange to see villages that once cowered at the mention of Lannisters or Boltons going about their daily lives unafraid. Thought you might like to know that your name is less feared than it used to be unless you cross a Sellsword or two who still curse your dragons. I might travel east eventually, though I'm not sure. I've heard tales of forests in Essos that make our Wolfswood look like a backyard garden. Maybe I'll find time to see it. Don't get too comfortable in King's Landing. Boredom is the real assassin. Stay sharp. Best not to bother with a reply, as I'll be gone from this region soon. Just know I'm still alive and not yet bored. Arya." Daenerys read it twice, chuckling under her breath. She appreciated Arya's feral spirit, a living embodiment of how a person could endure unimaginable terrors and still carve out a measure of freedom. That freedom extended now to all the North and indeed to any part of the realm that chose to trade or travel without fear of immediate war. The roads were still not without bandits, but they were safer than they had been in years. The scars of the Dead's invasion had begun to fade as well, though Daenerys suspected no one would ever truly forget the long night. Setting the letters aside, she glanced at the rest of her documents. One in particular bore the sigil of House Martell, bright red on gold. She broke that seal next, scanning a carefully written message from the new Prince of Dorne, who identified himself only as Prince Quentyn, cousin to the late ruling family. He wrote that he had received her clarifications regarding the North's independence, and though some Dornish lords continued to murmur about following the North's example, Prince Quentyn himself had no wish to sever ties with the crown. He proposed a renewed pact of friendship, Dorne for the crown so long as the crown respects Dorne's customs, he phrased it. He also suggested a betrothal might strengthen ties, though he did not name a candidate. A purely political overture, no doubt, but the very mention was telling. Daenerys tapped her fingernails lightly on the table. Once she might have leaped at the notion of strengthening alliances through marriage. But so much had transpired. Her heartbreak over losing those closest to her, the unraveling of her relationship with Jon in the face of his true parentage, and the burden of forging a new kind of rule. She was no longer the young woman who believed a marriage tie was a simple political transaction. Still, it was worth considering. She would not rush into any union, but Dorne's stance was crucial. If marrying some distant cousin or minor branch lord of Martell lineage could avert future unrest, she might weigh the costs. She placed the Dornish letter with the other high-priority matters. Her gaze roamed to the final letter, which was from Old Town's citadel. She felt a stir of curiosity. Samwell Tarly still resided there, presumably, or so she'd been told. He had become a chain-wearing maester, or near enough. The letter indicated that the citadel recognized Daenerys' desire to sponsor traveling maesters in the war-ravaged parts of the Crownlands, helping to re-establish basic knowledge of healing and literacy. The Archmaesters had apparently debated this plan vigorously, but the final message was one of cautious acceptance. Daenerys nodded, thinking that Sam's influence might be part of that acceptance. She hoped to speak with him one day to see how he was faring after everything. Her mind ran swiftly, weaving possibilities. Renewed shipping with Bravos, forging deeper ties with the North, pacifying Dorne's concerns, re-establishing the Maester's presence. It was a complicated tapestry, but one that gave her hope. Once she might have seen it all as a means to an end, uniting the 7 kingdoms under her banner. Now she saw that what mattered was weaving each piece into a stable realm. The North was no longer part of her dominion. She had chosen that path. Yet the realm did not break further under that arrangement. If anything, it found new balance. Yawning, she realized it was far later than she'd intended to stay awake. Tomorrow would bring fresh demands on her time, and the mind could only sustain so many hours of royal burdens before exhaustion undermined clarity. She doused the candles, leaving only the moonlight to guide her to her bed. As she lay down, she let her thoughts circle around Arya's brief letter. It was somehow reassuring to imagine the younger Stark wandering wherever she pleased, a living testament that the realm had edges that eluded the stifling grip of politics. Not all solutions were found in throne rooms. Some lay in the quiet roads between. She drifted into sleep, dreaming of a field of white flowers under a blue sky with dragons gliding overhead and distant shapes walking roads that led to hidden wonders. When she woke at dawn, she felt oddly refreshed, as though some small piece of her found solace in that dream's vision. The day began with the usual swirl of tasks. Breakfast in the council chambers. Tyrion enumerating a list of prospective trade deals, Varys quietly supplementing his remarks with information gleaned from his little birds, and Ser Davos Seaworth bringing practical observations about shipping lanes and port taxes. Gendry Baratheon, who had traveled to the capital for a round of meetings, spoke up about progress in the Stormlands, new shipbuilding efforts, repairs to fortifications, the forging of alliances with local lords who had once sworn to House Baratheon before Robert's rebellion. Daenerys listened attentively, mindful of each shifting piece. The realm was not so large that she could ignore any corner. She smiled at Gendry, remembering the uncertain blacksmith she had elevated to lordship. He wore it well, though his manners remained plainspoken. The Stormlands had found in him a fair leader, unburdened by the arrogance that sometimes plagued highborn. When Gendry finished, Tyrion turned to Daenerys. "Your Grace, we still need to address Prince Quentyn's letter. I gather we'll want to confirm that we appreciate Dorne's loyalty, but what do we say about the suggested betrothal? He's left it rather open-ended, which I suspect is a polite way of fishing for possibilities." Daenerys glanced around the table. She saw curiosity in Davos's eyes, wariness in Varys's, and mild amusement in Gendry's. "I have no intention of hastily marrying anyone simply for the sake of a treaty," she said firmly. "But I won't dismiss the notion out of hand. If a marriage alliance helps keep Dorne from drifting into independence or rebellion, I'll at least entertain the conversation. For now, I'll reply that we acknowledge the idea but must consider it carefully." "No promises." Tyrion nodded. "That's wise. The Martells once married into Targaryen lines centuries ago, which was how Dorne joined the realm without outright conquest. They might be seeking to evoke that history." Daenerys paused, letting the memory of old stories swirl in her mind. She recalled reading about Princess Maria Martell, who had wed a Targaryen prince long after the initial wars. "Yes, well, we all know how those alliances can be double-edged. I'll proceed with caution." Davos cleared his throat. That aside, the rest of Dorne's letter was quite courteous. They wished to negotiate new trade routes for their famous wines and peppers. Could be beneficial for King's Landing and for them. They also want to ensure their autonomy over local matters. I told them that's standard for any region under the crown so long as they pay taxes and heed the broader laws. Daenerys nodded. Prepare a response along those lines. I'll sign it once it's drafted. She glanced at Varys. Any further news from Bravos about the Iron Bank? Varys wove his fingers together. They remain satisfied with our repayment schedule, and so far, they've made no overt moves to fund would-be rebels. Our victory over Damian Lannister proved that such rebellions are futile. That said, the Iron Bank invests widely. We must keep them content. Daenerys allowed herself a small sigh. Then we'll keep paying our dues. Sometimes I wonder if the Iron Throne is just a seat for those who owe coin to Bravos. The remark earned a mild laugh from Tyrion and Davos. Even Varys let slip a thin smile. By midday, the council broke. Daenerys ventured out into the bustling courtyard of the Red Keep, where she watched new recruits for the City Watch train with wooden swords. Grey Worm stood at the perimeter, arms folded, occasionally giving instructions to the instructors. He caught sight of Daenerys and walked over, offering a slight bow of the head. "Your Grace," he said quietly. The crisp noon sun glinted off the leather straps of his armor. "We have improved the Watch's discipline. Crime in Flea Bottom has decreased. We found new ways to feed the poorest, soup kitchens as you ordered, but with more guard presence so they don't become places of violence." Daenerys studied his face. She could still see traces of grief in his gaze, the echo of losing Missandei and so many unsullied brothers. Yet he had embraced this new role, helping her maintain order without terror. "Thank you, Grey Worm. I know you prefer the open field of battle to Watch training, but your leadership is invaluable here." He inclined his head again. "This is the cause we fought for, to free people from fear. Your methods in controlling criminals are different from what we did in Essos, but I see your reasoning. No reason to crucify or publicly mutilate the guilty if we can rehabilitate them." She placed a hand on his shoulder, letting him feel her genuine gratitude. "We break the cycle, remember? That means we don't repeat the same brutalities that shaped us." She paused. "How are the Unsullied faring?" "Many remain stationed in the city, but I know some have traveled to the outskirts." His posture straightened. "They are well, though some grow restless. We have known only war and training our entire lives. Peace is new. Some question their purpose now that the wars are done." Daenerys understood that restlessness. The Unsullied had been forged to be perfect soldiers, stripped of normal joys or ambitions. Would any of them like land or another way of life? She asked, trying to imagine how the realm might integrate them beyond just standing guard. "They've earned the right to choose." Grey Worm's face twitched as though the thought were alien. "Some might," he said. "Most are still uncertain. We never expected to have choices. I shall speak with them, help them understand you would not oppose it." "Yes, do that," Daenerys said. "Let them know they can serve if they wish, but if any dream of something else, they have my blessing." She thought again of how she had once freed the Unsullied from their masters in Astapor. Now she hoped to free them from the shadows of war itself. Grey Worm parted with a respectful nod, returning to the training yard. Daenerys remained a moment longer, thinking on how drastically her rule in Westeros differed from Essos. There, she had broken shackles, toppled slavers, and learned that even liberated people sometimes turned on each other if they lacked structure. Here, she was forging a calmer approach step by step. The question was whether she could maintain it when new storms inevitably arose. She turned and headed inside, moving through corridors where the air smelled of fresh plaster and paint. Her footsteps echoed, each step reminding her of how the Red Keep had been ravaged by dragonfire in that final assault on Cersei's stronghold. Now, those blackened walls were gone or covered up with new stone. A few charred support beams had been replaced, their old presence impossible to fully erase but mostly hidden behind new craftsmanship. She wondered if future generations would realize how close the city had come to absolute ruin. She made her way to her solar, only to be met by a steward who informed her that someone unexpected awaited her in the throne room. Curious, Daenerys followed, noticing that the steward wore a slightly perplexed expression as though uncertain how to handle this visitor. They passed the wide double doors into the throne room, a space partially restored to its old grandeur. Tall columns, newly hung banners, a dais that elevated the Iron Throne in all its spiky severity. Yet the scars remained if one looked closely, freshly installed columns where older ones had collapsed, stone floors still bearing subtle scorch marks. A testament to the violence that had once taken root here. And there, standing before the throne, was a familiar figure, Bronn of the Blackwater, now the Lord of Highgarden by a quirk of negotiations following the final war. He wore fine but somewhat gaudy clothes, greens and golds that clashed just a little with the rest of him, and a wide grin that revealed a certain roguish cheer. As Daenerys entered, he bowed with theatrical flourish, sweeping off a plumed hat that looked absolutely ridiculous on him. "Your Grace," Bronn said, his voice drawling in that casual way. "A pleasure to see you again. Heard you've been busy building a kingdom that's not always on fire. Congratulations." Daenerys stepped closer, aware of the faint echo her boots made on the polished floor. She did not particularly like Bronn, given his opportunistic nature, but he was a practical man who had proven useful, and now he was a lord in her realm, albeit in the Reach. "Lord Bronn," she said carefully, "I didn't expect to see you away from Highgarden. Is all well in the Reach?" Bronn shrugged. "More or less. The old lords don't like me much since I'm not exactly Highgarden stock, but I've been keeping them in line, partly with gold, partly with a crossbow or two. That said, we've had some trouble with bandits on the roads toward the Stormlands. Roving gangs that pick off caravans. I thought I'd come see if the crown might be interested in helping me clear them out." Daenerys considered him, trying to read any hidden motive behind his casual grin. "The crown always takes an interest in the safety of major roads. What do you propose?" "Well," Bronn said, letting his gaze roam around the throne room, "I propose an official agreement. The crown sends a detachment of soldiers to patrol the roads, or at least coordinates with the Stormlands so we can clamp down on these bandits from both ends. In return, Highgarden remains a loyal friend, pays its taxes, sends grain to King's Landing in times of need. And maybe I can pass along any special finds we come across." He winked as if alluding to contraband or hidden treasure. "Not that I'd keep the best for myself, of course." Daenerys' lips curved in a thin line. "Are you always so forthright about your scheming, Lord Bronn?" He held up his hands in mock protest. "I'm just a simple Sellsword turned lord trying to navigate these fancy new arrangements. Didn't get my seat because of my lineage after all." She studied him, reflecting on how Tyrion had once insisted they buy Bronn's loyalty with Highgarden. A promise made in desperation, but a promise nonetheless. So far, Bronn had not betrayed them, which was more than many highborn knights had done under less strain. "Very well," Daenerys said. "I'll speak to Gendry Baratheon about coordinating patrols along the borders between the Reach and the Stormlands. We can spare some men for that purpose, and I expect you to do your share. If your local lords have knights, it's time they earn their keep." Bronn's grin widened as though he had expected some sort of haggling, but found her quick acceptance refreshing. "Excellent. You won't regret it, Your Grace." He paused, letting his gaze drift to the Iron Throne. "Don't think I've seen it up close since you took the city. Nasty piece of furniture, isn't it?" Daenerys let her eyes flicker toward the throne. "It is. 1,000 melted swords hammered into something that cuts if you sit carelessly. A fitting symbol of old conquest." He barked a short laugh. "Well said. Not sure it's where I'd want to plant my arse, but I suppose it'll do for a queen." He gave an exaggerated bow. "I'll take my leave then. Need to find Tyrion and share a drink or two while we finalize details. You know me, I'd never pass up good wine." She watched him amble off, wondering if the day would ever come when she didn't need to rely on opportunists like Bronn. But for all his flaws, he was open about them, and ironically that made him more predictable than many who cloaked their greed behind courtesy. In the next few days, plans were made to dispatch a small crown force to the border between the Reach and the Stormlands, with an equal contingent from Highgarden's men and from Gendry's Stormlander knights. Gendry grumbled about working with Bronn but agreed that the roads needed security. Daenerys received a sealed letter from the Vale in which Lord Jon Royce expressed satisfaction with the new stability of the realm. He hinted that the Vale might increase its trade with the north now that winter snows no longer blocked the mountain passes. Daenerys responded diplomatically, encouraging greater trade. She also used the opportunity to reaffirm that the Vale was well within its rights to maintain internal autonomy. No forced oath-taking, no overshadowing from the crown. That approach had worked so far, building an image of her reign as far less oppressive than her father's or some of her ancestors. One afternoon, as she was reviewing a proposed city ordinance about fisheries along the Blackwater Rush, Daenerys heard a gentle knock on the solar door. Tyrion stepped in, a bemused look on his face. "Your Grace, we have an unexpected visitor." "Well, two unexpected visitors, though they're traveling together." Daenerys set down the ordinance. "Who are they?" Tyrion smirked. "Samwell Tarly and Gilly. They arrived by ship from Old Town, apparently, and came straight to the Red Keep. Sam claims he has important matters to discuss. They also brought a young child, I believe. The steward is seeing to them now." Daenerys felt a flush of warmth at the name Samwell Tarly. The last time she'd seen him, tensions had run high. He'd learned that Daenerys was responsible for executing his father and brother after they refused to bend the knee, and then he'd discovered Jon's parentage. So much had transpired since then. She had heard indirectly that Sam had gone to the Citadel to complete his maester training, or at least something akin to it. She was curious and perhaps a bit anxious about why he would come here now. "Show them in," she said softly, rising from her seat. "Let's hear what Samwell Tarly has to say." A short while later, the steward escorted Sam and Gilly into Daenerys' solar. Sam looked older than she remembered, though not by many years. He wore robes that resembled a maester's, though less formal than the archmaesters might wear, slate gray with a single link of metal visible at his neck. Gilly hovered beside him, carrying a small child who stared around with wide eyes. Sam's cheeks colored slightly upon meeting Daenerys' gaze. "Your Grace," he said, bowing awkwardly. "Thank you for agreeing to see us so quickly. I wasn't sure if you'd be available." Daenerys inclined her head with a gentle smile. "You are welcome, Samwell Tarly." "Gilly. And is this little one your son?" Sam rubbed the back of his neck. He's Gilly's son. But yes, I care for him as my own. His name is Little Sam, though he's not so little anymore." Gilly managed a shy smile, glancing around. "We didn't mean to intrude, but Sam said we had to speak with you because there's important news from Old Town. The Archmaesters have concluded something about the realm's future." Daenerys gestured for them to sit at a small table near the window. She poured cups of watered wine for everyone, including a little half-cup for Gilly if she wished. Tyrion hovered in the background, curious. "Speak freely," Daenerys encouraged. "What news from the Citadel?" Sam breathed out, glancing at Gilly for support. She gave him an encouraging nod. "I suppose the short version is that the Archmaesters are eager to finalize the official record of the recent wars from the War of the Five Kings onward, including the defeat of the White Walkers. But that also ties into the question of succession and borders. Since you recognized the North's independence, the old references to 7 kingdoms need adjusting. The Citadel wants clarity on how to record the realm's structure in the official histories and legal documents." Daenerys blinked. Of all the things she'd expected, a request about cartography and naming conventions was not high on the list. So they're concerned about how many kingdoms exist. The North stands alone, while the Crown technically holds 6 kingdoms if we consider everything south. But Dorne, the Vale, the Stormlands, the Reach, the Westerlands, the Riverlands, the Crownlands, it's complicated. Sam nodded vigorously. "Yes, exactly. The Archmaesters prefer neat categories. They're wise in many ways, but they do love a well-defined order. With the North recognized as an independent kingdom, should the rest be referred to as the 6 kingdoms? Or do we keep calling them 7 out of tradition? They want a formal decree from you if possible." Tyrion let out a muffled laugh. "Is that all? The maesters can't decide if a formal change in nomenclature is warranted?" Sam looked sheepish. "It's not just nomenclature. The laws that define each region's obligations to the crown, how the king or queen is titled, how treaties are worded, it's all bound up in whether we say 7 kingdoms or 6 or the unified realm. We might think it trivial, but the Archmaesters see it as crucial for the realm's continuity of law." Daenerys sipped her wine, considering. "I never intended to confuse them. But the North has its freedom, so in effect, we do not hold 7 kingdoms any longer. The question is whether the rest remains the 7 kingdoms by courtesy or becomes the 6 kingdoms. But I worry that changing the old name might spark further unrest. Some in the Vale or Dorne might see it as an admission that the old order is undone, and they might push for their own independence more aggressively." Tyrion folded his arms. "Yet calling it the 7 kingdoms might be inaccurate. Sam's right, there is a question of legal precedent. If a new monarch sits the Iron Throne in the future, that monarch might face a tangle of confusion. It might be simpler to embrace the 6 kingdoms and codify the North's independence in those same documents. That way, each region sees the monarchy as honest about the changes that have occurred." Daenerys drummed her fingers on the table. Gilly, holding little Sam, watched the exchange with wide eyes, as though she never imagined being in the presence of so many high matters. "Very well," Daenerys finally said. "I'll consult with Sansa and see if she minds an official term that acknowledges the North's separate status. If she agrees, we'll have the Citadel record that we rule over 6 kingdoms, not 7. We'll have them note that the North is a sovereign ally. Let them adjust the maps and the titles as they see fit. It's time we reflect reality." Sam's face lit up in relief. "Thank you, Your Grace. That will make everything much clearer for the scholars and scribes." They also wanted to see if you'd consider new guidelines for the distribution of maesters across the realm. Some have asked if the North will maintain the same policies as before. But I can write to Sansa, or you can, to clarify. I'll speak with Sansa soon, Daenerys said. Thank you, Sam. And you, Gilly, how has Old Town treated you? Any troubles? Gilly gave a small shrug. It's very big and confusing, but Sam's done well with his lessons. I spend most of my time caring for little Sam. Sometimes people stare because they know I'm from beyond the wall, but it's not so bad. It's nicer than Craster's Keep. The mention of Craster's Keep made Daenerys' stomach churn at the memory of the horrors she'd heard, but she smiled gently. I'm glad you found some peace. You're both welcome in this city if you ever need a place to stay. For now, how long do you plan to remain? Sam hesitated. Not long. The Citadel asked me to deliver these questions personally, but I'd like to return soon. Though there might be an opportunity for me to assist with establishing those traveling maesters you mentioned. I have some skill organizing supply lines and training novices. If you think it beneficial, I could stay a short while to help coordinate. Daenerys considered. That would be most welcome. We need every wise mind we can get. Tyrion can help you with the logistics. We'll arrange rooms for you and Gilly in the keep. And your son, of course. We'll ensure you have what you need. Sam's shoulders relaxed, gratitude evident in his eyes. Thank you. I appreciate that. I also wanted to mention I'm sorry if our last meeting was so tense. We were all under such strain. She took in his earnest expression. She recalled how hurt he'd been to discover that she'd executed his father and brother. She did not regret that decision. They had openly defied her in a time of war, but she understood the personal toll it took on Sam. War makes us do things we might never do otherwise, she said quietly. We can't change the past, only shape the future. Sam gave a faint, sad smile. Yes, thank you, truly. They lingered a while longer, discussing the technicalities of the traveling maesters program. Tyrion chimed in with suggestions, and Gilly occasionally brightened at the mention of possibly traveling to certain villages that needed healers. Little Sam played quietly with a wooden figure, occasionally glancing around at the grown-ups in polite confusion. When at last Sam and Gilly departed to settle into their assigned quarters, Daenerys and Tyrion exchanged thoughtful looks. The realm is evolving faster than the Citadel can keep up, Tyrion remarked. But it's a good sign they're not outright resisting. A recognized queen in the south, a separate queen in the north, and no civil war in between. I doubt many older maesters would have predicted such a thing. Daenerys exhaled. We need them on our side. The maesters are the keepers of knowledge. If they record events fairly, future generations might see the sense in what we're building. Tyrion nodded, then changed the subject. There's another matter. Prince Quentyn Martell has sent a messenger requesting a formal audience with you here in King's Landing. He wants to bring a small delegation, likely to talk about that betrothal idea, or at least solidify an alliance. Should I arrange for his visit? Daenerys drummed her fingertips on the table again, a habit she'd picked up from the endless considerations each day required. I see no reason to refuse him. The Dornish have always been proud, sometimes fiercely independent. If we can secure a peaceful understanding, all the better. Yes, invite him, but make no promises about marriage. Understood, Tyrion said, a trace of mischief in his tone. True to that arrangement, Prince Quentyn arrived a fortnight later, accompanied by a small retinue of Dornish nobles. They came by ship up the Blackwater, docking near King's Landing's main harbor. Daenerys greeted them in the throne room, dressed in a formal yet relatively simple gown of black and red, a sweeping cloak pinned at her shoulders. She remained standing at the base of the dais rather than perched atop the Iron Throne, a subtle but intentional choice that might signal a more open, less intimidating approach. Prince Quentyn was a man of perhaps 30, lean of build, with sun-bronzed skin and a short, neat beard. He wore silks in the orange and red palette typical of Dorne, and a pendant shaped like a sun and spear glimmered at his neck. He offered a respectful bow, which Daenerys acknowledged with a tilt of her head. "Your Grace," Quentyn said, voice smooth, "your hospitality precedes you. We've been well treated since setting foot in the city. Though I confess, I had hoped to glimpse your dragons overhead. The tales of them are legendary in Dorne." Daenerys made a mild gesture with one hand. They roam freely but often find roosts outside the city walls. Fear not. You may hear their roars at sunrise. She allowed a hint of warmth in her expression. Welcome to King's Landing, Prince Quentyn. I trust your journey was uneventful. He straightened, nodding. Relatively. The stepstones can be perilous, but we avoided pirates. I come bearing gifts, if you'll permit a small display of Dornish generosity. Daenerys gestured for one of the Red Keep's stewards to accept what Quentyn's attendants carried. Jars of spiced wine, intricately painted vases, and bolts of fine cloth dyed in the vibrant shades only found in the southern deserts. Daenerys thanked him politely. She recognized these tokens for what they were. Part courtesy, part demonstration that Dorne still had wealth and style enough to matter. Once the formalities were done, she escorted Quentyn and his top advisors to a private solar for discussions. Tyrion, Varys, and Davos attended on Daenerys' side, while Quentyn brought two older nobles who introduced themselves as Lord Vaith and Lady Toland. Over wine and olives, they conversed about trade expansions and the possibility of opening new routes from Sunspear to King's Landing. Quentyn reported that Dorne's water gardens needed certain supplies that could be obtained cheaply from the Crownlands, while the capital certainly stood to gain from Dornish spices and fruits. The conversation felt cordial, almost too smooth. Daenerys suspected the deeper point was the alliance he'd hinted at in writing. Sure enough, Quentyn soon brought it up. Your Grace, my family recalls the old ties between Dorne and House Targaryen. He said, setting down his wine cup. In the days of Aegon the Conqueror, we resisted Targaryen rule until marriages and treaties brought a peaceful union. It's a proud chapter in our history. Now that you are forging a new era, we see a reflection of those peaceful aims. Dorne wishes to stand beside the crown, not beneath it, just as your father once recognized. But to ensure that bond never breaks, a new marriage might do wonders. Daenerys kept her face neutral, though her mind churned. Tyrion slid her a sidelong glance, letting her decide. She had known this was coming. I acknowledge that a marriage often seals alliances, she said carefully. But I have no current plans to wed. My experiences with the realm have taught me caution. Quentyn inclined his head. I understand. I speak not only for myself, there are other scions of Dornish heritage who might be suitable. We wouldn't presume to force a match, but we want to open the door. If not yourself, perhaps a union with one of your close kin, if you have such left? I recall whispers of Aegon Targaryen, but many say he was lost or he trailed off. Daenerys' heart twinged at the mention of Jon, whose birth name might have been Aegon Targaryen. But Jon was gone beyond the wall, uninterested in crowns or alliances. She forced a composed smile. I have no kin to offer. My nephew, if he can even be called that, is not in a position to marry. Nor does he wish to return to southern politics. As for me, let us say I keep my options open, but I do not jump into matrimony lightly. Quentyn pressed his lips together. Fair enough. In the meantime, might we formalize an agreement of mutual defense? Dorne will stand with you should any foreign threat arise or if internal rebellions threaten the peace, and we hope for reciprocal assurance. Daenerys nodded. That's entirely reasonable. If Dorne is attacked or threatened unduly, you'll have the crown's support. Provided, of course, that you do not invite aggression by unprovoked forays. We want peace, not new wars. A faint flicker of amusement crossed Quentyn's face. Dorne has rarely been the aggressor, Your Grace. We value our independence too much to risk losing it in foolish conquest. But yes, mutual defense is precisely what we desire. Tyrion leaned in. Then perhaps we should draft a formal treaty. Prince Quentyn, you and your advisors can review it alongside the Crown's counsel. Once all parties agree, we can sign. That might suffice to assure your lords that we truly stand in harmony. Quentyn and his advisors expressed interest, and so the negotiations advanced over the next several days. Daenerys found Quentyn polite, occasionally brash with Dornish pride, but not hostile. He pressed the marriage question a few more times, hinting at younger cousins or nieces, but Daenerys politely deflected, determined not to trap herself in a loveless or purely political match. The memory of her relationship with Daario in Essos and the heartbreak around Jon Snow were caution enough. She would not let the realm push her into something that might lead to resentment. During those days, Quentyn toured parts of the city, paying particular attention to how the small folk fared. He seemed genuinely surprised to see how stable the capital was, given the horrors it had undergone. Daenerys saw some of his wariness melt into respect, especially after Tyrion recounted how Daenerys had handled the Damian Lannister uprising with minimal destruction. Quentyn even asked to see the dragons up close. Daenerys obliged, taking him to a secure courtyard where Drogon and Rhaegal often lounged. The prince kept a respectful distance, marveling at their size and power. She noticed how the dragons rumbled but did not lash out, a sign that they sensed no threat from him. It was a small thing, but it reaffirmed in her mind that trust was forming between them. On the final evening of his visit, a modest feast was arranged in the Great Hall. Musicians played soft tunes, a far cry from the raucous or grand feasts of old. Daenerys chose a seat not upon the Iron Throne but at a lower table near the hall's center, with Quentyn on one side, Tyrion on the other, and the rest of her closest allies and Quentyn's entourage surrounding them. The food was simple but tasty: roast pheasant, spiced carrots, fresh bread from the city's ovens. Dornish wine flowed, and Quentyn joked that if nothing else, the crown should import more of it. Halfway through the meal, Tyrion tapped his wine cup to draw attention. "Ladies and lords, we gather tonight to acknowledge a new treaty between the Crown and Dorne, one of mutual respect and mutual defense. Prince Quentyn Martell has proven himself a gracious ally, and we hope this friendship endures." He raised his cup, and the hall echoed the toast. Quentyn stood briefly, nodding to Daenerys. "And let it be known that Dorne does not forget the old alliance that once bound us to House Targaryen, nor do we forget that your queen allowed the North to stand apart without forcing them to bow. That is a sign of true leadership. May we prosper under such leadership." He lifted his cup, and another ripple of murmured approval passed through the attendees. Daenerys inclined her head, letting a small, genuine smile grace her face. This was the kind of unity she had once dreamed of, though in a different shape. The North was free, yet they were allies. Dorne was loyal but not oppressed. The Vale, Stormlands, Westerlands, Riverlands, and Reach each held their own measure of autonomy, bound to the crown by mutual benefit rather than the lash of dragonfire. It was a delicate balance, one she must preserve carefully, but it was real. In that moment, Daenerys felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. When Quentyn departed the next morning, he left behind a signed treaty. Daenerys made sure to dispatch copies to her scribes for archiving, as well as one to be forwarded to the Citadel for official record. She also wrote to Sansa that day, informing her of the new arrangement with Dorne and asking for Sansa's thoughts on the Six Kingdoms question. She wanted to be certain that the North had no objection to that official naming. Privately, Daenerys doubted Sansa would mind. Sansa rarely quibbled over titles so long as her people's freedom was preserved, but it was best to be thorough. As the weeks rolled on, news from across Westeros painted a picture of gradual healing. House Tully in the Riverlands reported a bountiful spring planting, though they worried about labor shortages. The Vale saw caravans passing safely through the mountains, welcoming more travelers from the north. Gendry's Stormlands thrived with new shipbuilding ventures, though the occasional squall battered the coastline. Bronn sent occasional letters from Highgarden about the border patrol efforts, complaining about bandits but grudgingly conceding that the joint patrol was working. Daenerys settled into a rhythm of governance that felt almost mundane. Day by day, she checked and balanced the realm's needs, guided by Tyrion's counsel, Davos's pragmatic honesty, and Varys's intelligence network. Occasionally, she took flight on Drogon or Rhaegal, stretching her muscles and letting her mind clear in the open sky. The city dwellers no longer scattered in terror when a dragon soared overhead, though they always watched with awe. She suspected the memory of kings landing aflame was not so easily forgotten, but her repeated refusal to use the dragons for anything but deterrence had softened some fears. One bright morning, as she was concluding an outdoor audience with a group of merchants in the Red Keep's courtyard, she spotted a rider galloping through the open gates. The horse was dusted with sweat, the rider leaning forward with an air of urgency. Daenerys paused her conversation, excused herself, and moved toward the stable yard. Tyrion and Grey Worm accompanied her. The rider reined in, breathless, and bowed. "Your Grace," he gasped, holding out a sealed scroll. "A raven arrived at Riverrun from the north. Urgent news for you," they said. "I rode day and night to bring it." Daenerys's heartbeat quickened. Urgent news from the north usually meant something significant. "Thank you," she said, taking the scroll. She saw at once that the wax seal bore the direwolf crest of House Stark. She offered the rider a cup of water from a nearby attendant, then stepped aside to read the letter in private, with Tyrion and Grey Worm at her back. Breaking the seal, she scanned Sansa's recognizable handwriting. "Daenerys, I write with urgency. Something has happened beyond the wall. A large party of wildlings, led by Tormund Giantsbane, arrived at the last hearth. They speak of a disturbance in the far north. Rumors of new shadows stirring in the lands of always winter. They say they have not encountered whites or white walkers, but something else is unsettling the free folk. Jon has not returned with them. Tormund says Jon parted ways some weeks back, searching for lost clans, and has not been seen since. There is concern for his safety. I do not believe this is a new invasion of the dead, at least there's no sign of that. But the free folk are restless and many have drifted south uncertain. I fear for my brother. Arya, if she gets wind of this, may try to cross the wall alone. I intend to send out rangers from Castle Black to search for Jon, but I must ask if you can assist. Your dragons, or even some of your men, might stand a better chance of covering that vast wilderness. I know Jon has chosen his own path and the North does not presume to drag him back. But if he is in danger, or if there is a new threat brewing, we cannot afford to ignore it. We do not want a repeat of the long night. I ask for your swift reply and any aid you can spare. Sansa Stark, Queen in the North. Daenerys read the letter twice, her pulse thudding in her temples. Jon missing? Another disturbance beyond the wall? She closed her eyes briefly, remembering the chill of the far north, the horrifying memory of the Night King's legions, the heartbreak and unity that had come with that war. She had lost so much, and yet they had survived. Could there truly be another shadow in that icy realm? She handed the letter to Tyrion without a word. He read it silently, his mouth drawing into a thin line. Grey Worm glanced between them, awaiting orders. When Tyrion finished, he inhaled. It might be nothing, he said, some new tribe of free folk jockeying for territory, or a rumor that got out of hand. But if Tormund is worried enough to travel south, that suggests it's not a mere ghost story. Daenerys' mind raced with possibilities. If Jon was lost, did he need rescue? Or had he simply gone deeper into the wild to help some stragglers? And these new shadows, could they be anything akin to the White Walkers or something else entirely? The land beyond the wall was vast and cruel, rarely charted. I can't ignore this, she said firmly. The realm might be at peace, but if there is any threat from beyond the wall, we must confront it now, not wait for it to grow. And I owe it to Jon and to the memory of what we all fought for. Tyrion dipped his head. I understand. But how exactly do we assist? Sending a ground army beyond the wall could be both dangerous and politically fraught. The Night's Watch might not welcome a large southern force marching into their domain, especially if you still have dragons overhead. And it's early spring. The roads might be passable, but the far north could still be locked in ice. Daenerys turned to Grey Worm. We won't march an entire army, but we can spare a small expeditionary force, volunteers primarily. I will go myself, along with Drogon and Regal. The dragons can fly over that terrain. Search for signs of Jon or any disturbance. A few scouts, unsullied or northern rangers, might accompany on the ground. Grey Worm's brows furrowed. You wish to go beyond the wall again, Your Grace? That is dangerous. Jon is family, Daenerys said quietly. He might not want my help, but I refuse to abandon him if he's in danger. Besides, if there's truly something stirring, better I learn of it firsthand. I can reach Winterfell by dragon faster than any messenger. Tyrion looked concerned but resigned. Then I'll remain here, keep the realm running in your absence. Davos can help coordinate. Are you sure you wish to do this personally? Daenerys nodded, steel in her voice. Yes, Sansa called on me for help, and I'll not fail her. Nor will I fail Jon. I'll fly north, gather more information at Winterfell, then proceed to the wall. With any luck, we'll find Jon safe and discover these rumors are just illusions. She felt a swirl of uncertainty in her gut. She recalled the terror of the long night, the dread that had settled in her bones as she watched the dead surge against their fortifications. But she also remembered the resolute strength of those who had banded together to push back the darkness. They had won that war once. Perhaps they could manage again if need be. Within hours, Daenerys set her plan into motion. She penned letters to Gendry, Bronn, Prince Quentyn, and the Vale, explaining she would be absent for a time on a matter of northern concern. She named Tyrion as regent in King's Landing, ensuring he had the backing of Grey Worm and the City Watch to maintain stability. She gathered a handful of volunteers, a dozen unsullied who were skilled in harsh terrain, a few wagons of supplies, and 2 experienced maesters. She would not replicate her earlier mistake of going north with insufficient aid. Even a small group needed thorough preparations. By the next dawn, Daenerys stood in the courtyard with Drogon and Regal perched atop the walls, their massive silhouettes outlined against the gray sky. Tyrion, Davos, and Varys assembled to bid her farewell. Sam Tarly and Gilly watched from the sidelines, concerned but supportive. Sam offered a quiet word. "Be careful, Your Grace. The wilds beyond the wall can be treacherous even without monsters." She mustered a gentle smile. "I will. Thank you for everything, Sam." Tyrion stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Are you certain you won't let me accompany you? I know you want me here to keep an eye on the city, but..." Daenerys placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're needed more in King's Landing right now. You've grown adept at keeping this realm afloat in my absence. I trust you to do it again." He exhaled, then nodded. "Very well. Just try not to get yourself killed." "I'll do my best," she quipped, though her heart was heavy. She embraced Davos briefly, thanked Varys for his counsel, and then climbed atop Drogon's back, settling into the ridges behind his neck. Regal roared as if impatient. Below, the unsullied volunteers mounted stout horses or clambered onto a pair of wagons. They would travel by road while she flew ahead to Winterfell to speak with Sansa and coordinate. Once they reached the north, they'd link up again for the journey to the wall. With a powerful downbeat of Drogon's wings, Daenerys lifted into the sky. Regal followed, letting out a piercing cry that echoed over the city's rooftops. The morning sun broke through the clouds, painting the dragons in shimmering gold. Below, the people in the streets paused to watch, perhaps recalling older times when the sight of two dragons might have struck terror. Now many simply marveled. Even those who flinched did so more from reverent awe than abject fear. Daenerys leaned into the wind, guiding Drogon northward. The air tasted of promise and a thread of dread. She wondered what she would find beyond the wall. Had some vestige of the Night King's power survived, or was it a new force altogether? Or merely a rumor that had grown out of proportion? And what of Jon? Was he truly lost, or simply wandering deeper into the unknown? Her heart clenched at the memory of Jon's solemn farewell. She understood why he had chosen the life of the free folk, stepping away from crowns and politics. She also remembered the pang of betrayal she'd felt when she first learned of his true parentage, though that had faded over time, replaced by an acceptance that both of them bore the weight of lineage they never asked for. If he was in danger, she would not abandon him. No matter their complicated history, she could not forget the man who had fought at her side against the Night King, who had proven his bravery and honor time and again. The miles fell away beneath Drogon's beating wings. She soared over fields and hills, glimpsing villages below that seemed almost peaceful in the clear light of spring. Regal flew nearby, occasionally drifting to catch a different current. On the horizon, she could just make out the distant rise of the neck, the passage into the north. She pressed onward, pushing Drogon at a strong but steady pace. By evening, she spied Moat Caelin's ruined towers in the distance. She guided Drogon to land near a small clearing, letting him and Regal rest for the night. A handful of traveling northerners camped near the old fortress stared in open wonder as she dismounted. They recognized her silver-white hair, her Targaryen features, yet none drew weapons. News of the queen who let the north be free had reached even here. Daenerys exchanged a few words with them, learning that they had heard rumors of new unrest beyond the wall. They knew little, only that the free folk were uneasy. At dawn, she continued, crossing the marshy ground around Moat Caelin in flight, eventually reaching more solid land in the north. The winter snows had receded to reveal rugged terrain, scattered pine forests, and the wide King's Road stretching onward. By midday, Winterfell's dark stone walls came into view, familiar yet still imposing. Daenerys felt a swirl of emotion at the sight. She recalled her last visit, how she and Sansa had parted on friendly terms, forging a bond that defied the realm's bloody past. She circled above the castle once, letting the dragons announce her arrival with resounding roars. Then she guided Drogon to a cautious landing in the courtyard, where stable hands and guards scrambled to clear space. Regal followed, settling near the outer wall, sniffing at the new scents. Immediately, Daenerys saw Sansa Stark hurrying across the courtyard, flanked by her own guards. Sansa's eyes were wide, her auburn hair pinned in a braided crown, the bronze circlet marking her as the queen in the north. But Daenerys also saw concern etched into Sansa's features. Daenerys slid off Drogon, landing lightly on her feet. Sansa came forward, dipping her head in acknowledgement. "Daenerys," she said, her voice carrying warmth despite the tension. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Daenerys reached out, clasping Sansa's hand. "Of course. I came as soon as I got your letter. Tell me everything. How serious is this threat beyond the wall? And have you any news of Jon?" Sansa led her inside, away from prying ears in the courtyard. Even so, Daenerys noticed more watchers than usual, many of them likely worried about these rumors. Once inside the Great Hall, far less crowded than during feasts, Sansa guided Daenerys to a table near the raised platform. The air smelled of smoke and pine. A few northern lords stood by, including Lord Glover and Lord Serwyn, each wearing anxious expressions. "I wish I had better news," Sansa began, taking a seat. "Tormund and some of the free folk have been at the last hearth for over a week now, resting after their journey. They speak of strange lights in the far north, as well as rumors of entire pockets of free folk disappearing. They mention storms that come and go unnaturally. It doesn't sound like the walkers, it's different, they say, but they're spooked enough to come south." Daenerys listened intently, dread coiling in her stomach. "And Jon? Tormund said Jon wanted to check on some isolated clans that never joined the free folk during the war. He left with Ghost and a few companions, but they parted ways from Tormund's group. That was weeks ago. Tormund expected Jon to catch up or meet him at an agreed spot, but he never did." Sansa's lips thinned. A few rangers from Castle Black went searching, found no sign. Daenerys pressed her eyes shut, picturing Jon alone in those icy wastes. Or perhaps not alone, but with only a few men. "I'll go beyond the wall," she said firmly. "I have a small force on the way. My dragons can scout from the air. Perhaps we can find Jon's trail, or at least learn the truth of these so-called shadows." Sansa exhaled. "I feared you might say that. The cold is still bitter up there. But if anyone can make a difference, it's you and your dragons. My own rangers can help. You'll have their knowledge of the terrain." Lord Glover cleared his throat from the sidelines. "Your Grace," he addressed Daenerys, which was notable given his once bristling attitude toward foreigners. "Be mindful. The wilds beyond the wall are never kind, even in the best times. If this is a new threat, we do not know its nature. Could be some abomination left behind by the walkers. Could be something else altogether." Daenerys offered him a solemn nod. "I understand, but we can't ignore it. If Jon is in danger, or if this threat gathers strength, we can't wait until it becomes unstoppable." Sansa's gaze flicked around the hall, noting the worried expressions. "I'd go myself if it weren't for my duty here. I can't leave the North leaderless. But Daenerys, if there's anything at all I can offer, supplies, guides, ravens, tell me." Daenerys placed a hand over Sansa's. "Your trust is enough. We'll need food, warm furs, and anyone with real experience beyond the wall. I have a group of Unsullied traveling by road. They'll be here soon. Then we'll go." Sansa nodded, relief mingling with fear in her eyes. "I'll see that it's done. In the meantime, rest. You look weary from your journey." Daenerys did feel the ache in her limbs, but her adrenaline still ran hot. She joined Sansa in a smaller room off the hall where they spoke more privately. There, away from the ears of the northern lords, Sansa allowed her regal composure to slip just slightly. "I'm afraid," she admitted, voice hushed. "We only just healed from the last war. My people can't face another wave of horror. And Jon, if we lose him," she bit off the words as if refusing to dwell on that possibility. Daenerys laid a comforting hand on Sansa's shoulder. "We won't let that happen. He's survived worse. And we have knowledge now, knowledge we lacked before. If there's a true threat, we'll face it early." Sansa closed her eyes briefly. "Thank you. I trust you, Daenerys. Please be careful yourself." They lingered a moment in silent understanding, the memory of old battles filling the spaces between them. Once they had been rivals. Now their bond was strong enough that Sansa's eyes glistened with genuine concern for Daenerys' safety, and Daenerys felt a surge of protectiveness for the North and for Jon. Within 2 days, Daenerys' small host arrived, the Unsullied riding into Winterfell's courtyard with wagons of supplies. Sansa had assembled a handful of volunteer rangers, men who had ventured beyond the wall more than once. One was a scarred man named Farlan, who claimed to have hunted with free folk long ago. Another was a stoic archer who went by Rowan, who had tracked the undead during the long night. They joined Daenerys' party along with a single maester who insisted on bringing a pack mule loaded with medical supplies and herbs. Sansa oversaw the final preparations, ensuring they had furs, dried meats, and enough weapons to face unknown foes. The plan was for Daenerys to fly ahead with Drogon and Regal while the ground party followed as quickly as they could. They would meet at Castle Black or the ruins thereof, though some parts of the wall were still partially intact. The eastmost sections had collapsed during the war. The portion near Castle Black had been repaired enough that a garrison of Night's Watchmen still maintained it. On the morning of departure, a chill wind swept through Winterfell's courtyard, reminiscent of the deeper winter they had all survived. Sansa stood by Daenerys' side, both wrapped in heavy cloaks, as the Rangers and Unsullied formed up. Gray clouds overhead threatened snow, though it was nearing late spring. The North's weather was ever unpredictable. Drogon and Regal perched on the battlements, sending occasional plumes of steam from their nostrils. Daenerys turned to Sansa. "We'll send ravens if we learn anything. If we need reinforcements. I know the North stands ready, but let's hope it won't come to that." Sansa swallowed, nodding. "I'll pray for your safe return and for Jon's. We can't afford to lose either of you." Daenerys embraced her briefly, then stepped away, mounting Drogon with practiced grace. The Unsullied began leading their horses out of the castle gates, accompanied by the Rangers. Regal took flight first, letting out a challenging roar. Drogon beat his wings, taking to the sky with Daenerys astride. She felt the familiar rush of air, the surge of power beneath her as the ground receded. The courtyard and Sansa's upturned face shrank below. She and Regal soared north, beyond Winterfell's walls, following the white ribbon of the road that led to the wall. Far below, the small host of men and wagons trudged onward. They would take much longer to reach Castle Black, but Daenerys wanted to scout ahead, see if there was any sign of free folk movement or something else ominous. The land stretched out in rolling hills, sparse forests, and the occasional half-frozen stream. Even from the sky, she could sense the hush that settled over these parts in the tail end of winter. By midday, Daenerys spotted the looming shape of the wall, or what remained of it. Though the eastern breach where Viserion and the Night King had torn it down was far away, the central section near Castle Black was still formidable. The glacier-like structure extended in both directions, partially scarred but upright. Closer now, she saw Castle Black's stone ramparts, black banners fluttering in the harsh wind. She guided Drogon in a wide circle, letting Regal do the same. Below, black-cloaked figures pointed, some running out into the courtyard. Daenerys landed in the open space near the castle's gate. Men of the Night's Watch approached with caution, crossbows ready but not aimed. One older officer stepped forward, wearing a worn cloak trimmed with black fur. He saluted. "Your Grace, we heard word from Winterfell you might be coming," he said, voice gruff from years in the cold. "I'm Ser Harlan, the current master-at-arms here. We're a small garrison. You'll forgive the lack of formalities." Daenerys dismounted. "Well met, Ser Harlan. I come seeking news of Jon Snow, and any sign of trouble from beyond the wall." He rubbed his bearded jaw, glancing warily at Drogon. "We've sent men searching for him, but so far, no trace. Tormund Giantsbane's group passed through earlier told us a similar tale. We keep an eye on the gate, but the free folk say the real unrest is farther north. Some returned from the Fist of the First Men, saying the area was abandoned, no living souls left. But they found odd tracks. Not human, not animal." Daenerys' heart tightened. "You suspect a creature?" Harlan shrugged helplessly. "We're in the dark, Your Grace. Whatever it is, it spooks the free folk enough that many have drifted south again. A few nights ago, we saw a flicker of strange lights on the horizon, like greenish glows dancing in the sky. Could be an aurora, or something else." An uneasy hush followed his words, and Daenerys recalled how the White Walker's eyes had glowed an icy blue. "This was different if it was green. We'll have to see for ourselves," she said. "My ground party is on its way. Once they arrive, we'll press north. In the meantime, I can scout by air. If Jon is out there, I want to find him." Harlan gave a reluctant nod. "We'll offer any help we can, but we can't spare many men. The Watch is a fraction of what it was." "That's fine. Any volunteers with real knowledge of the region are welcome. We intend to bring at least a few people who know how to track in the tundra." She offered him a tight smile. "Thank you, Ser Harlan. And if you see or hear anything new, let me know at once." That afternoon, Daenerys soared above the wall, venturing a short distance into the lands beyond. The sky was gray, heavy with unshed snow, and the terrain below looked bleak. Patches of ice, stunted trees, rocky outcrops. She saw occasional footprints or trails, but it was hard to discern from high above which might belong to animals or humans. Regal flew a parallel path, sometimes dipping lower to get a better look. They found no sign of Jon, nor any settlement of free folk. The emptiness unsettled Daenerys more than she cared to admit. She recalled how vibrant and terrifying the battle had been when the Night King's army marched. Now the land lay silent, waiting. She flew back to Castle Black by twilight, half frozen in the cutting wind. Over the next few days, Daenerys waited for her ground party to catch up. She lodged in the old commander's quarters, a sparse room with a single narrow bed and a chest for belongings. Her presence seemed to unnerve some of the watch, but they were polite enough. She took repeated flights north, each time venturing a bit farther, scanning for anything unusual. Sometimes she glimpsed small groups of free folk trudging south, and she even landed near one such group to question them, startling them with her dragons. They mumbled of hearing strange howls at night, of seeing flickers of greenish light in the distance. They had no news of Jon. One woman said she saw a lone figure traveling east, matching Jon's general description, but she couldn't be sure. At last, Sansa's rangers and the Unsullied arrived, along with the maester and their supplies. Daenerys convened them in a repaired hall within Castle Black, along with a few older members of the Night's Watch. She unfurled a rough map of the far north, drawn mostly from half-legendary accounts. Points like the Fist of the First Men and Craster's Keep were marked. Beyond that, the map grew vague, with lines suggesting massive glaciers and mountainous terrain. Daenerys leaned over the map, her breath visible in the cold air. "We'll move north in 2 teams. The ground team will take a route through here," she pointed at the path Tormund allegedly used, aiming for the Fist of the First Men first. "My dragons and I will scout ahead from the air, searching for signs of Jon or any threat. We'll keep within a day's ride if we can, so we can regroup if needed. If we find Jon, we bring him back or press on, depending on his condition." One of the rangers, Farlan, nodded, his thick beard quivering with emotion. "Aye. That path might be passable this time of year. Watch out for sudden storms. The wind can kill a man before he even knows he's freezing." Daenerys' unsullied lieutenant, a man named Hazrak, stood stoically by her side. She had picked him because he had a knack for adapting to new environments. He spoke little, but his presence reassured her. His troopers were equipped with heavier cloaks, new boots lined with fur, and the best cold weather gear they could assemble. It would still be a harsh test for men born in warmer climates, but their discipline would help them survive. That night, Daenerys lay awake in her bunk, feeling the cold seep through the stone walls. She couldn't banish the image of Jon wandering alone, searching for lost free folk while a new threat crept through the icy wastes. Over the last year, she had learned to let go of old resentments about his heritage. She simply wanted him safe. Perhaps she wanted more than that, closure, or even a chance to mend the rift between them. But one step at a time. First, she had to find him. At dawn, she and her expedition ventured beyond the wall in earnest. The sight of the gate in the ancient ice closing behind them sent a shiver down Daenerys' spine. Ahead lay the wilds of the far north, where the old gods, the children of the forest, and the White Walkers had once roamed. Now it was said to be quiet, but Tormund's warnings suggested otherwise. Daenerys flew overhead on Drogon, Regal shadowing them, while the main group trudged below. The first 2 days were uneventful. They encountered pockets of free folk headed south, anxious to avoid the rumored shadows. Most were unwilling to guide them deeper for fear of whatever lay ahead. The weather was mercurial, flurries of snow giving way to patches of watery sunlight. At night, the temperature plummeted, forcing the ground party to huddle around fires in heavy tents. Daenerys camped with them, making sure to foster morale. She had grown used to simpler comforts during her Essos campaigns, but this was a different kind of hardship, a cold that bit at the bone. On the 3rd day, they reached the region near the Fist of the First Men. Daenerys recognized it from old descriptions, an ancient ring fort perched atop a circular hill used by the Night's Watch in times long past. She recalled hearing how Sam Tarly had once discovered obsidian blades there. Now the place stood eerily silent, battered by icy winds. Daenerys landed with Drogon and Regal a short distance away, letting the ground party ascend the slope. Farlan and Rowan scouted the perimeter, searching for tracks. They found evidence of a camp, charred remains of a fire pit, footprints leading away. As they investigated, a sudden swirl of snow kicked up, stinging Daenerys' cheeks. Regal let out a low rumble, his wings twitching. She felt an uneasy prickling along her spine as if the wind carried an unnatural charge. Hazrak signaled for the Unsullied to form a defensive circle. Then, from the western edge of the ring fort, a shape appeared. A lone figure staggered forward, leaning on a staff. The figure wore furs caked with ice, a hood drawn low. Everyone tensed, weapons at the ready, until the figure collapsed to their knees in the snow. Daenerys rushed forward, ignoring Hazrak's attempt to hold her back. She reached the figure, who was breathing raggedly. The hood slipped back, revealing not Jon Snow but a wildling woman with tangled hair. Her lips were blue, and she mumbled incoherently about lights in the sky. "Easy," Daenerys said, crouching beside her. She shouted for the maester, who hurried over with a blanket. The woman's teeth chattered, her eyes flicking in terror between Drogon and Regal. "We're not here to harm you," Daenerys added in a gentle tone. Though she doubted the woman's mind was fully coherent, Farlan recognized her. "That's Sevet. She was with Tormund's group, I think. Or one of them. She must have been separated." They gave Sevet water and wrapped her in furs. Slowly, she recovered enough to speak in stammering bursts. "Darkness. We saw men vanish in the night. Not walkers, green light. Took them, shadows moving." She coughed violently. "Jon, he went east, said he had to find them. We never saw him again. Then the storms came." Her eyes rolled, and she nearly passed out. Daenerys's pulse hammered. "Is Jon alive? Did you see him attacked?" She tried to keep her voice calm. Sevet shook her head weakly. "No. But no one came back from the east. So cold, so dark." Her voice trailed off, and the maester pressed a cup of something steaming to her lips. The ground party exchanged grim looks. Something was indeed happening out here. Something involving green lights and storms. Men disappearing without a trace. It didn't sound exactly like the White Walkers, but it was no less terrifying. Daenerys glanced at Drogon and Regal, who hissed at the air as though they sensed a wrongness. After pitching camp on the Fist of the First Men, they waited for Sevet to recover enough to say more. By nightfall, she confirmed that Tormund had split from Jon about 2 weeks prior. Jon insisted on checking rumors of a hidden freefolk enclave in some eastern ravine. Sevet had been part of a smaller group, but got lost when strange storms hit. She never saw Tormund or Jon after that. Others vanished at night, with no footprints leading away, as if they had been taken by ghosts. Daenerys found her mind drifting to old legends of the lands of always winter, places untouched by the sun, where monstrous creatures roamed. Could something else dwell in those depths, awakened by the same cataclysm that awakened the White Walkers centuries ago? She felt dread coil inside her, but she locked her jaw, refusing to yield to fear. On the 4th night, as they camped at the Fist, an aurora shimmered in the northern sky, greenish and purple light dancing like curtains. The free folk called it the breath of the gods. Daenerys stood outside her tent, swathed in furs, watching the eerie display. Drogon and Regal perched nearby, unsettled. The entire camp felt on edge. Hazrak approached quietly, spear in hand. "Your Grace, the men speak of ill omens in that sky." Daenerys rubbed her hands together for warmth. "Perhaps it's just a natural phenomenon, but we'll be careful. Tomorrow we push east, follow what leads we can. We must find Jon or his trail." He nodded, though concern lingered in his eyes. Come morning, they set off again, forging through a route Farlan claimed might lead to the rumored ravine. The weather worsened, swirling gusts of snow limiting visibility. Daenerys decided to stay on foot with the party, letting the dragons circle above but not straying too far. The terrain grew rugged, rising into rocky heights that cut across the horizon. By midday, they reached a gorge carved by an ancient river. Farlan pointed out signs that free folk had once sheltered in shallow caves here, old fire pits, scraps of bone. But the place was deserted now. That night, they camped near the mouth of the gorge. Daenerys took a shift standing watch, refusing to hide in her tent while others braved the cold. She paced among the sleeping forms, mindful of flickering shadows cast by torches. The dragons slumbered in a nearby clearing, wings folded. She found herself scanning the darkness for movement, half expecting an army of the dead to surge forward. But there was only the wind. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, a scream tore through the camp. Daenerys whirled, heart hammering. She sprinted toward the source, where two Unsullied had dropped their weapons, staring in horror. One pointed at the ground. A third Unsullied lay dead, his skin an ashen gray, eyes wide, but no visible wound. No blood, no sign of violence. His face was contorted in terror, mouth open in a silent wail. The maester rushed over, kneeling to examine the body. Daenerys clutched her cloak around her, the cold intensifying as though draining all warmth from the world. The surrounding men and women stirred, forming a circle. Drogon lifted his head, hissing. "What happened?" Daenerys demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The Unsullied who had found him spoke softly, clearly shaken. "We saw no one approach. He was on guard, alive one moment. Then we heard him gasp. By the time we reached him, he was like this." Daenerys crouched, touching the man's cheek. It was cold as ice, his flesh rigid. The maester's expression was grim. Some malignant force, perhaps a poison or a magic that froze him from within. "I've never seen such a thing." A wave of dread coursed through Daenerys. This was not a random wilderness hazard. This felt like something else, something that could kill silently. She recalled Sevit's words about men vanishing, about shadows in the night. Now they had a victim in their midst, apparently without a struggle. She rose, swallowing her fear. "Double the watch. No one stands guard alone. Light more fires. If anything tries to enter this camp, we'll see it." The next day was grim. They pressed on deeper into the gorge, fear gnawing at the party. Regal circled overhead while Drogon stayed nearer to Daenerys. The sense of being watched never left her. She saw no footprints beyond their own, no sign of life, yet the gloom weighed heavily. In the afternoon, a sudden storm blew in, the wind howling between the cliffs. The snow thickened to near whiteout conditions. They scrambled for shelter, finding partial cover beneath an overhang of rock. The dragons roared in frustration, pinned down by the fierce gusts. Daenerys huddled with the others, trying to keep them calm. Some whispered prayers to old gods or new. For a few hours, they couldn't move, battered by the storm. Daenerys half feared more silent attacks in the swirling snow. When the storm finally lessened, they emerged, drenched and shivering, to find fresh drifts piled high. Still, they trudged on, desperate to spot any clue of Jon. Their only consolation was that no more men died that day, though the memory of the Unsullied Guard's death lingered like a specter over the entire company. At dusk, they spotted a figure silhouetted against the ridge above them. At first, Daenerys tensed, fearing another ghostly killer. But the figure waved, shouting something. Farland recognized the voice, Tormund Giantsbane. The red-bearded wildling clambered down the slope, looking half-frozen but alive. Relief flooded Daenerys' chest. Tormund greeted them with his usual bravado, though the lines of worry on his face were deep. "Daenerys Targaryen. So you came. Good, we could use your blasted dragons." He cast a wary glance at Drogon, who perched near a boulder, snorting clouds of steam. "We've been searching for Jon too. No luck." Daenerys studied Tormund, noting the new scars on his cheeks. "We heard rumors of vanishings of strange lights. We've lost one man already, killed by some unknown force. Have you seen anything?" Tormund's expression darkened. I've seen it. Bodies turned to husks, no sign of the attacker. I found a trail of footprints once, leading nowhere, like they just stopped. I suspect some foul sorcery. We had a handful of men vanish from our camp with no trace but a faint shimmer in the air. The wind picked up, flurries brushing across their faces. Daenerys' stomach lurched. This was more insidious than the White Walkers who had marched with armies. This threat was invisible, ephemeral, picking people off one by one. "And Jon?" she asked softly. Tormund exhaled white plumes. "Last I saw him, he was heading for the Frostfangs, that mountain range in the east. People said a group of stragglers lived there. He was determined to bring them word or help them move south. That was over a fortnight ago. I traveled that way, didn't see him. Could be he went further. Could be he's..." Tormund bit his tongue. "But we don't give up easily, do we?" Daenerys looked toward the distant mountains, their peaks barely visible in the gathering dusk. "Then we'll go there. We can't abandon him." They joined forces with Tormund's few remaining companions, forging onward. To speed the search, Daenerys took to the sky again, scanning the ridgelines from Drogon's back. Each day seemed colder than the last, as though spring had surrendered to winter in this cursed land. The nights brought flickers of that eerie aurora, and Daenerys often felt the hairs on her neck stand on end, as though some presence watched from the shadows. More than once, Regal or Drogon let out sudden roars at night as if they sensed an intruder, but nothing came into view. The men huddled together, trembling with more than mere cold. Daenerys forced herself to stay strong, reminding them that they had fought the dead and won. But a quiet terror seeped through the ranks. On the 7th day beyond the wall, as they skirted a wide ravine near the Frost Fangs, Daenerys spied something from Drogon's vantage. A lone figure lying in the snow by a half-frozen river. She guided Drogon down carefully, heart-pounding. The figure wore black leathers trimmed with fur, and the form was motionless. Daenerys dismounted, kneeling in the snow. Her breath caught in her throat, the hair was dark and matted with ice, the face half-buried. "Jon," she whispered, adrenaline surging. She pressed her gloves to his face, turning it gently. Yes, it was Jon Snow. His lips were cracked, his eyes closed. She felt for a pulse at his neck, half expecting none. A faint throb greeted her fingertips. He was alive, but only barely. She waved frantically for the others, who arrived on foot. Tormund sank to his knees, relief and worry warring on his face. He's breathing, but he's half-frozen. Daenerys whipped out a spare fur cloak covering Jon. "We need shelter. Build a fire. Now." She cradled his head in her lap, checking for injuries. His breathing was shallow and a dark bruise marred his temple. "Jon, wake up," she pleaded, voice trembling. "We're here. You're safe." He stirred weakly, eyes fluttering open just a fraction. "Dany?" he croaked, voice barely audible. "I'm here," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "Don't move. We'll keep you warm." They formed a makeshift camp, the Unsullied and Wildlings working together to raise windbreaks and start a roaring fire. The maester used heated stones and shared body heat to stabilize Jon. Daenerys stayed close, refusing to let him slip away again. After an hour or two, his color improved slightly, though he still drifted in and out of consciousness. Once he was stable enough to speak a few words, Daenerys knelt at his side, gently holding his hand. "Jon, what happened?" she asked softly. "Where is your party?" He swallowed, shivering. "Gone. We found the clan. But something attacked. Night. Green lights, shadows, men screamed, then vanished. We tried to fight, but how do you fight shadows? I was knocked down a ravine in the chaos. Didn't see the others after that." His voice rasped. "I tried to get back, but the storms. I got lost." Daenerys's chest ached with sympathy. She glanced at Tormund, who shook his head. The wildling's eyes reflected sorrow. "It's the same we've seen," Tormund said. "Whatever it is, it's picking people off. The free folk are fleeing. We can't fight ghosts." Daenerys brushed the hair from Jon's forehead. "Then we find a way. We overcame the Night King because we had dragons and unity. We have those still. If these shadows can be burned, we'll burn them." Her voice hardened. "But first, we need to get you back to safety." Jon's grip tightened weakly on her hand. "If you go, it'll keep happening," he said, teeth chattering. "We have to stop it here." Daenerys felt torn. The men were exhausted and terrified, and many of the free folk had scattered. But leaving this threat unchecked was an invitation for it to grow. "We can't risk everyone's lives," she said carefully. "Some can return with you to the wall. We can attempt another approach. Maybe the Citadel or Bran, if he's still in the north, would have knowledge of such a threat." Jon's eyelids flickered. "Bran might, yes, but I don't know if he sees the future anymore. He left for the west, or so Arya said." He coughed, a rattle in his lungs. "We have to warn everyone. The free folk, the north, the rest of the realm. If we faced the dead once, we can't ignore new horrors." Daenerys squeezed his hand, fighting the swirl of panic in her gut. She had the dragons, but no idea if dragonfire would destroy these shadows. Another war in the north could unravel the fragile peace she'd built. But ignoring it was worse. "Rest now," she told him, forcing a measure of calm into her tone. "We'll decide our next move once you're stronger." Jon slipped into a half-conscious sleep. Daenerys rose, finding Tormund, Hazrak, and the others gathered. She relayed Jon's words. Fear hung heavy in the camp. They debated fiercely. Some wanted to flee south. Others insisted on pressing on to locate the source of these attacks. Tormund argued that if they just ran, the threat might follow. Daenerys made her decision, though her voice shook with the enormity of it. "We'll pull back to a defensible position. Somewhere we can form a perimeter, use the dragons. Lure these shadows if they come. We have to at least attempt to fight. But if it proves impossible, we retreat and warn the north fully. Sansa will muster an army if needed. They chose to move to a rocky plateau a short distance away with natural walls on two sides. Jon was carried on a makeshift litter, and the dragons flew overhead, occasionally blasting streams of fire into the air as if to challenge the unseen foe. The day was half spent by the time they reached the plateau. They arranged camp in a defensive circle, building fires all around. Daenerys stood at the edge, the wind whipping her hair, scanning the horizon for any sign of green lights. Night fell, bringing swirling snow. The aurora shimmered faintly in the sky, twisting and coiling. Jon stirred, groaning from his place near a central fire. Daenerys knelt by him, ensuring he was covered in furs. He looked marginally better, though still weak. Suddenly, Regal let out a piercing shriek. Daenerys jumped up, heart pounding. She heard a collective gasp from the men. Drogon roared as well, turning his head toward the far end of the plateau. In the darkness, a faint, greenish glow flickered. It danced like sickly flame, casting twisting shadows over the snow. A chorus of terrified murmurs rose from the party. Daenerys grabbed a torch, stepping forward. "Stay together," she called. "Form ranks, don't let anything separate you." The Unsullied tightened into a formation, spears bristling. Tormund brandished his sword, eyes wide, and the rangers strung their bows. Jon, too weak to stand, tried to push himself upright, but the maester held him down. The green glow pulsed, seeming to move closer. Daenerys felt the air grow icy cold, more than mere winter. Drogon roared again, exhaling a jet of flame that lit the darkness. The flame washed across the snow, but the glow just flickered out of reach. Then shapes emerged from the gloom, vague humanoid outlines, translucent, each trailing a shimmering aura of green. They had no clear faces, but Daenerys sensed malevolence emanating from them, an ancient hunger. An unsullied man near the edge of the formation gasped, staggering. One of the shapes brushed him, and he collapsed, his body turning rigid in moments. Another shape darted among the men, too fast to track. Tormund swung his sword, shouting a war cry. His blade passed through the spectre as though through fog, meeting no resistance. The spectre lunged at him, but Regal unleashed a streak of dragon fire. The flames seared the air, and with a shriek, the shape dissolved. A flicker of hope jumped in Daenerys' chest. Dragonfire could harm them. "Use the dragons," she shouted, mounting Drogon in a rush. Drogon snapped his jaws, spewing a blast of flame at another ghostly figure, which evaporated with a screech that echoed in Daenerys' mind. Regal joined in, scouring the area with repeated bursts of flame. The swirling snow hissed into steam, the ground blackening. Yet more shapes emerged from the darkness, a writhing cluster of greenish silhouettes drifting closer. Daenerys cursed. The dragons soared overhead, unleashing fiery onslaughts. But the ghosts seemed to shift or melt away, only some being caught by the flame. On the ground, men screamed as ghostly touches drained life in an instant. Daenerys saw the unsullied thrust spears that passed harmlessly through those spectral forms. A few rangers tried flaming arrows, which seemed to scatter them, but only if they hit exactly. From her vantage atop Drogon, Daenerys realized that direct blasts of dragonfire could destroy these apparitions if aimed precisely. She maneuvered Drogon, unleashing gouts of flame. Each time a specter was consumed by the fire, it shrieked and vanished, leaving behind a swirl of greenish sparks that died in the wind. Regal followed suit, but the swirling snow made aiming difficult. Below, the camp was a scene of chaos. Men stumbling, some dropping dead, others flailing at intangible foes. Daenerys' heart thundered in her ears. She had not expected an enemy of this nature, untouchable wraiths that only Dragonflame could reliably destroy. Gritting her teeth, she guided Drogon in close, ignoring the sting of ice in her eyes. She saw a cluster of 3 specters advancing on the maester's position, where Jon lay helpless. She shouted, "Dracarys!" Drogon bathed the area in fire, carefully angled so as not to harm Jon. The specters shrieked, dissolving, and Daenerys prayed the heat wouldn't harm her allies. She saw the maester shielding Jon with his own body. They seemed alive if singed. Bit by bit, the dragons purged the plateau, each burst of flame scattering or destroying pockets of ghostly forms. Some fled into the night, drifting away as if they'd simply lost interest. After what felt like an eternity but might have been minutes, the green glow faded, leaving only the glow of the aurora overhead and the reek of scorched snow. Daenerys hovered with Drogon, scanning for more threats. Regal roared, a final challenge, but no new shapes appeared. With trembling limbs, Daenerys guided Drogon to land. She dismounted and rushed to the center, where Tormund stood, panting, sword in hand. The men who survived looked shell-shocked. Several lay dead or dying, faces contorted in horror. The Unsullied had lost a few more, and a handful of wildlings were gone as well. Jon still lay on his litter, eyes wide. He had witnessed part of the battle, though too weak to participate. Daenerys sank to her knees beside him, breath ragged. We drove them off," she said, voice shaking. "Dragonfire can kill them, but they're elusive. I don't know if they're truly gone." Jon's voice was a dry whisper. "They'll be back, unless we find their source." Daenerys nodded, though exhaustion weighed on her. The men were in no state to continue deeper into the wilderness. They needed rest, healing, a new plan. She glanced at the bodies strewn across the blackened snow. Her heart tightened with grief and fury. Another war, this time against ghosts. She felt tears burning behind her eyes. Enough. They had fought so hard for peace. Jon gripped her hand. "We have to warn the North. Sansa will rally a larger force. Maybe the Citadel can help with spells or something. This can't be won by steel alone." Daenerys pressed a trembling kiss to his knuckles. "You're right. We can't let them tear us apart. We'll regroup. We'll gather knowledge, ally with anyone who knows how to fight such spirits." Her voice grew firm. "I broke the Night King's hold once. We can do it again. We're Targaryen and Stark, fire and ice. We stand together." Jon nodded weakly, relief glimmering in his eyes. "Together," he echoed, letting exhaustion claim him. The maester bent to tend his wounds. Tormund and Hazrak approached, battered but alive, awaiting orders. Daenerys rose, battered by the chill wind, her cloak singed by stray sparks of dragon fire. Her hair whipped around her face, but she stood tall. "We ride south tomorrow," she commanded, voice resolute. "We'll bury our dead, then retreat to the wall. Let the realm know there's a new darkness up here. We won't face it alone. We'll gather an alliance as we did against the dead. The living stand as one, or we fall. But I promise you all, these shadows will not claim our home. Not again." A few scattered murmurs of agreement rose from the men, though fear still clung to them. Drogon and Regal loomed against the swirling snow, their breathing heavy, flank scales steaming in the frigid air. The plateau bore the blackened scars of their fire. In the distance, the aurora still shimmered, an unsettling reminder that the threat had not vanished. Daenerys set her jaw, gazing at that eerie light. She recalled the vow she had once made, to break the wheel, to end the cycle of death and fear. Perhaps that vow would be tested anew, here in the far north where old powers lingered. But she would not shrink from it. With Jon by her side and Sansa, the north, and the rest of Westeros behind her, she would face whatever shadows lurked. The realm would not descend into nightmare again. She was Daenerys Stormborn, a queen who had learned to make peace and wage war with equal resolve. And she would not abandon the living to ghosts of ice and green flame. As the camp settled into a tense, watchful silence, Daenerys crouched beside Jon, gently brushing the snow from his hair. He was resting more easily now, though his face was pale. She squeezed his hand, feeling a faint squeeze back. "We will find a way," she murmured, voice low. "I promised you once I'd help save the world. I'm not done yet." Jon's eyes opened briefly, clouded with pain, but he managed the ghost of a smile. "I believe you," he rasped. His gaze flicked to the swirling sky. "The dawn will come," he said softly, echoing an old hope from the war against the dead. "We'll make it come." She nodded, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. The warmth of her dragons was the only heat in that icy domain, a promise that the realm's spirit, its fierce desire to live, still burned. The night stretched on, the wind howling across the plateau like the cries of lost souls. But Daenerys faced it with unwavering resolve. Shadows might rise, but the living would gather, the dragons would roar, and light would burn away the darkness once more.